Hello, and a very warm welcome to you. Welcome to this quiet space, this peaceful time that is just for you. Think of this moment as a quiet island, a safe harbor from the busy, noisy sea of your day. For the next little while, there is nothing you need to do, nothing you need to be, except to be here, resting comfortably. Tonight, we are going to drift together on a gentle river of time. It is a journey that will carry us back to the very beginning of a story you know so well, but perhaps have never truly heard. It is the story of sweetness. So, as we begin, I invite you to find your place of perfect rest. Allow yourself to settle in, making any tiny adjustments you need to feel completely and utterly supported. Let your arms and legs rest naturally by your sides. Let your head feel heavy and cradled by your pillow. This is your time to let go. Let us begin by gently releasing the day that has passed. Whatever happened today, whatever conversations you had, whatever tasks you completed, whatever worries crossed your mind, just for now, allow them all to become distant. Imagine each thought, each memory of the day, is a single soft autumn leaf. Now imagine you are standing by a slow, quiet stream. One by one you can place these leaves onto the surface of the water, and you can watch as the gentle current carries them away. Watch as the boat of your thoughts slowly, so slowly, drifts around a bend in the river, disappearing from your view. The river continues to flow, but your mind is now clear and calm and still. Now let us bring our awareness to our breath. Our story tonight is about sweetness. It is the taste that we often associate with our happiest memories. The taste of a birthday cake shared with people we love. The taste of a special treat given to us by a grandparent. The taste of a cold, sweet drink on a hot summer's day. Sweetness is the taste of joy, of comfort, and of celebration. But every great light casts a shadow. And the long, epic story of sweetness also has a shadow side. A story of bitterness. A story of incredible desire, of great struggle, and of immense cost. It is a story that has shaped our world in ways we can barely imagine. So tonight we will explore both. The light and the shadow. The wonderful and the difficult. The sweet and the bitter. This is the bittersweet story of sugar. Our story begins not in a modern kitchen with the white crystals we know so well. No, our story begins much, much further back in time in a warm and ancient land. It begins not with a crystal, but with a tall, green and humble blade of grass, swaying gently in a warm tropical wind. Let your quiet, restful mind become a vessel for our journey now. We are drifting back. Not just a few hundred years, but thousands, tens of thousands of years, to a time before great cities, before written words, before the world as we know it had taken shape. We are traveling to a beautiful, green island, nestled in the warm waters of the Pacific Ocean. The island of New Guinea. Let us imagine we are standing there now, in the heart of an ancient rainforest. The first thing you feel is the air. The air is warm and very heavy with moisture. It feels like a soft, warm, wet blanket on your skin. Every breath you take is thick with the scent of life. You can smell the rich, dark, damp earth beneath your feet. You can smell the sweet decay of fallen leaves, returning their goodness to the soil. And you can smell the beautiful, exotic fragrance of 1,000 different kinds of flowers, their bright colors like jewels hidden in the deep green. The only sounds are the sounds of the forest itself. It is a gentle, constant chorus of life. The buzz and hum of millions of tiny insects. The strange, beautiful, and sometimes funny calls of birds with bright, rainbow-colored feathers, high up in the canopy. And every now and then, the gentle, rhythmic patter of raindrops on the giant, waxy leaves of the trees, even when the sun is shining. And the light is magical. The canopy of the trees is so thick that the bright, direct sunlight cannot reach the forest floor. Instead, the light is filtered through a million moving green leaves. It is a soft, gentle, green-tinted light. And here and there, a single strong sunbeam will find a way through the leaves, piercing the green gloom like a golden spear, illuminating a small patch of the forest floor and making it glow. This is a world that does not know the meaning of hurry. It is a world of slow, patient growth. A world that is pure and wild and incredibly, peacefully alive. And here, in a sunny clearing where a bit more of the golden light can reach the ground, we see it. The plant that is at the heart of our story. It does not look like a treasure. It looks like a type of giant, noble grass. It grows in a thick, dense clump, a small family of stalks rising together from the earth. These stalks are tall and strong, taller than a person. Some are as tall as a small house. They are beautiful in their simple strength. The stalks have a wonderful color. A vibrant, living green, the color of new life. But there are also hints of sunny yellow, or even a deep royal purple where the sun has kissed the stalk. The stalk is smooth, but it has joints running up its length, like the knuckles on a long green finger or the sections of a bamboo pole. They look like strong green bones holding the plant's heavy leaves up to the sky. And from the very top of each stalk, a beautiful fountain of long green leaves sprouts and arches outwards. They are like giant, green blades of grass. They rustle and whisper to each other in the gentle breeze, a quiet, soothing sound. This plant is called sugarcane. But the true magic of this plant, the reason we are telling its story, is not in its height or its color. The true magic is happening on the inside, silently, secretly, every single moment of every single day. This tall, green grass is performing a quiet, constant miracle. It is drinking the sunlight. Imagine its wide, green leaves are like thousands of tiny, open hands, turned up to the sky, catching the warm, golden energy of the sun. Deep inside its millions of tiny cells, a slow, magical dance is happening. The plant takes this captured sunlight, it takes the clean, cool water that it has drunk from the rich, damp earth with its roots, and it takes the very air that we all breathe, and it begins to weave them together. It is a form of ancient, natural alchemy. It weaves these three simple things, light, water, and air, and it transforms them into something entirely new, something full of power, something precious. It is creating liquid energy. It is creating sucrose. It is making sugar. And the plant stores this liquid treasure, this captured liquid sunlight, deep within the tough, fibrous walls of its tall, strong stalks. The very heart of the sugar cane is a hidden, secret river of pure sweetness. For thousands and thousands of years, this sweet secret was known only to the other creatures of the forest. The plant was simply a part of the great, green living world. A wild boar, a powerful animal with a tough, leathery snout and strong tusks, knows the secret of the sugar cane. When it is hungry for a special, energetic treat, it will use its great strength to crash through the outer wall of a stalk. It breaks it open and then uses its teeth to tear out the wet, white, stringy pulp from the inside. As it chews, the sweet, watery juice is a burst of pure energy. It is a reward for its effort, a taste of pure, wild sweetness. Other, smaller animals also know the secret. Small, nimble rodents with sharp teeth would gnaw at the very base of the plant, where the stalk is sweetest. And bright, colorful birds might find a place where a stalk has cracked, and they will sip at the sticky, sweet sap that oozes out. For all these creatures, the sugarcane was a special gift from the forest, a source of joy and energy. And for an immense stretch of time, this was the entire life of the sugarcane. It grew, it drank the sunlight, and it shared its sweetness with its neighbors in the great, green forest. Its long and often difficult journey with humanity had not yet begun. It was a sweet promise, waiting patiently in the heart of a tall, green blade of grass, in a forest that time had all but forgotten. For an age, the sweet secret of the sugarcane was kept by the creatures of the forest. The wild boar, the nimble rodent, the colorful bird, they all knew where to find this special treat. The plant was a part of their world, a gift that they accepted without question. But now, a new creature was walking quietly in this green, sun-dappled world. A creature with curious hands, a wondering mind, and a heart that was open to learning the secrets of the forest. The first people. Let us imagine their lives. They lived in small, close-knit groups, perhaps families. Their homes were not made of stone or brick, but of the things the forest gave them. Strong branches and giant, waxy leaves, woven together to keep them dry from the gentle rain. At the center of their small village was a fire, a place of warmth and safety, where they would cook their food and share stories in the quiet of the evening. Their knowledge was not written in books of paper. Their knowledge was written in their minds and in their hearts. It was a library of whispers, passed down from parent to child, in stories told under the soft light of the moon. They knew the forest as well as we know our own homes. They knew the track of every animal. They knew the sound of every bird. They knew which mushrooms were safe to eat, which roots were good for medicine, and which bright red berries were a delicious, tart treat. They were a part of the forest, and the forest was a part of them. They moved with a quiet watchfulness, their senses open to all the small details of the world around them. And it was this quiet, patient watchfulness that led to our great discovery. Let us imagine a young girl. She is walking silently at the edge of the forest, where the great trees give way to a sunny clearing. Her job is to gather food for the family, perhaps some mushrooms that grow at the base of a damp, fallen log. Her eyes are sharp and she notices everything. She sees a small group of birds, their feathers a brilliant blue, fluttering excitedly around the base of the tall green stalks of a strange grass. Then she sees a small furry rodent like a squirrel, nibbling eagerly at the bottom of one of the stalks. She is curious. The animals are usually so careful, but they seem to have forgotten all their caution. They are completely focused on this one plant. She wonders why. This is not a fruit tree. It has no berries. It is just a tall, thick grass. What could be so special about it? She waits quietly until the animals have had their fill and have scampered away. Then she cautiously approaches the clump of tall, green stalks. She looks down at the base where the little rodent was nibbling. She sees the small teeth marks in the tough outer wall of the stalk. And she sees a single clear, sticky drop of sap oozing out from the tiny wound. A small, black ant is already making its way purposefully towards this single, glistening drop. The girl's curiosity is now very strong. She has been taught by her parents to be very careful with new plants. But she has also been taught to trust the wisdom of the animals. If the birds and the rodents are eating it with such joy, then it must be safe. She reaches out a single finger and gently touches the clear, sticky drop. It clings to her fingertip. She lifts her finger and looks at it closely in the soft, green light. Then she brings it to her nose. It smells faintly sweet and fresh and green, like the smell of the forest after a rain. And then she makes a decision. A decision that will one day change the entire world. She slowly, so very slowly, brings her sticky fingertip to her lips. And she tastes. The feeling is instantaneous. It is a flavor that her mind has no name for. It is not the savory taste of roasted meat. It is not the earthy taste of a mushroom. It is not the sour tang of a wild berry. It is pure, clean, uncomplicated, wonderful sweetness. It is a jolt of pure joy that travels from her tongue, through her entire body. It is the taste of happiness. A wide, uncontrollable smile spreads across her face. She has tasted captured sunlight. Her first instinct is to share this wonderful discovery. But the little drop is gone. She wants more. She tries to break off a piece of the tall, green stalk. It is very tough and strong. Using all her strength, she finally manages to bend and snap off a small section. She sees that the inside of the stalk is not hollow. It is filled with a wet, white, stringy pulp. She puts a piece of this pulp in her mouth and begins to chew. Her mouth is flooded with the sweet, refreshing juice. It is even better than the single drop. It is a wonderful, watery, sugary delight. Forgetting all about the mushrooms, she runs back to her family, clutching the precious piece of the green stalk in her hand. At first, her family is cautious. They look at the strange plant with suspicion. But they see the look of pure joy and excitement on her face. They see her put a piece in her own mouth and chew with great happiness. So one by one they try it too. And one by one, the same look of surprised wonder spreads across their faces. The children laugh with delight. The tired hunters feel a new burst of energy. In that moment, a new and happy secret has entered the life of the tribe. This discovery did not change their world overnight. It was not a food that could fill their bellies and stop their hunger like a potato or a piece of meat. No, it was something different. It was a special treat. It was a source of pure joy. It became the taste of celebration. After a successful hunt, or during a special gathering, the children would be given a small piece of the sweet cane to chew on, a wonderful and exciting reward. It became a source of strength. The hunters, when they were preparing to go on a long journey deep into the forest, would now carry a short, heavy piece of the sugar cane with them. When they felt their energy fading in the middle of the day, they would find a quiet place to sit, and they would chew on the sweet pulp. The liquid sunlight, stored inside the plant, would give them new strength to continue their journey. But for thousands of years, this was the entire story of sugar. It was a simple, innocent, and natural pleasure. It was a direct gift from the forest. There were no bowls of it. There were no recipes for it. There was no way to store it or save it. The sweetness was tied to the plant itself, and to the moment it was enjoyed. It was a temporary joy, a burst of energy, a simple gift from the green earth. Before it could begin its long and complicated journey to conquer the world, its sweetness first had to be set free from its tall, green, grassy prison. And that is the next part of our bittersweet story. For thousands of years, the story of sugar remained a local one, a secret held by the people of the warm, green islands of Southeast Asia. But plants, like stories, do not like to stay in one place forever. They travel. The sugarcane did not travel on its own. It had no seeds that could fly on the wind. It traveled with people. As small groups of families decided to find new homes, moving from one island to another across the warm, blue water, they took their most precious things with them. They took their tools, their animals, and they took the plants that kept them alive. And now, the sweet cane was one of those precious things. Imagine a simple, carved canoe, making its slow way across the sea. In the canoe, a family carries a few short pieces of the sugarcane stalk, their ends carefully wrapped in wet leaves to keep them alive. When they arrive at their new home, one of the first things they do is find a sunny, fertile spot to plant these precious cuttings. It was in this way, in a slow green wave of human movement that took many, many centuries, that the sugarcane plant finally arrived in a new and remarkable land. It arrived in the great subcontinent of India. India, at this time in our story, was a very different world from the simple forest clearings where the sugarcane was born. This was a land of ancient cities with busy, colorful markets. It was a land of powerful kingdoms and deep thinkers. It was a place where scholars studied the stars and the mysteries of the human body, writing down their knowledge on carefully prepared palm leaves. It was a culture of deep thought and of great innovation. And when the clever people of India tasted the wonderful sweetness of the sugar cane, their minds, which were trained to solve great and complex puzzles, saw a new and beautiful puzzle before them. They thought, this sweetness is a magical gift. But it is a prisoner. It is trapped inside the tough, stringy fibers of this tall grass. And its gift is temporary. The juice is wonderful, but it goes sour and spoils in just a day. How can we do better? How can we set this pure sweetness free from its green prison? How can we make it last so that we can enjoy it in the winter? How can we capture it so we can send it as a gift to a faraway friend? This was the great question. And the answer they found would change the world forever. They began a slow, patient process of experimentation, a kind of kitchen alchemy. The first step was to free the juice. They learned that if they harvested the tall, green stalks and crushed them with great force, the sweet juice would pour out. Imagine a large, heavy stone wheel, being pulled in an endless, patient circle by a strong, calm ox. This was a mill called a ghani. The sound of the day would be the slow, heavy footsteps of the ox, and the rhythmic, groaning creak of the wooden press. A worker would feed the tall stalks into the mill, and out would pour a slow, steady stream of the sweet, greenish-gray juice. A river of sweetness, finally freed from the plant. But this was only the first step. The next step was to purify it with fire. Imagine a special open-air kitchen, a place filled with warmth and the most wonderful, sweet smell. The air is thick with steam. The freed juice is poured into huge, shallow clay or iron pots, resting over slow-burning, steady fires. As the juice begins to heat up, it bubbles and simmers. The great amount of water that is mixed in with the sugar begins to turn into steam, rising up and disappearing into the air. A skilled worker, a sugar master, stands patiently by the pot. Using a long-handled ladle, he gently skems any foam or dark impurities from the surface of the bubbling liquid. His movements are slow, focused, and graceful. It is a quiet, meditative work, cleaning and purifying the sweet juice, concentrating its essence. As the hours pass and more water leaves as steam, the liquid in the pot begins to change. It grows thicker. Its color slowly deepens from a pale, watery green to a rich, beautiful golden brown, the color of late afternoon sunlight or dark, liquid honey. The sweet smell becomes richer and deeper. And then, when the syrup is just right, when the sugar master knows by its thickness and its smell that the moment has come, the final, most magical step is performed. The workers carefully ladle the thick, hot, golden syrup out of the boiling pots. They pour it into large, shallow clay dishes, or into cone-shaped molds. And then they simply carry these dishes to a cool, dark, quiet room. And they leave them there, to rest. And to wait. And as the thick syrup rests in the cool air, a quiet, unseen miracle begins to happen. The tiny, invisible particles of sugar, the sucrose molecules, which had been swimming freely and happily in the water, now find themselves getting closer and closer together. The water that had been their home was now almost all gone. So they needed to build a new home. A strong and orderly and beautiful home. And so they began to hold hands with each other. One tiny sugar particle would connect with another. And then another and another. They began to build a beautiful, orderly, crystalline structure. They were creating a solid form for themselves. They were becoming crystals. When the mixture was completely cool, it was no longer a liquid. It had transformed into a solid mass of rough, brownish, crunchy, and intensely sweet crystals. This was the world's very first raw sugar. In the ancient, beautiful Sanskrit language of India, they called this new and wonderful substance Khanda. Let that word rest gently in your mind. Khanda. It is a beautiful word. And it is the great-great-great-grandfather of our modern English word, candy. The invention of Khanda was a true revolution. The sweetness of the sun was no longer a prisoner, locked inside a green stalk, to be enjoyed for only a moment. It had been set free. The sweetness could now be scooped into a clay jar and stored for a whole year. Could survive the long rainy season. It could be used in cooking or in medicine in a precise, measured way. And most importantly of all, it could now be put into a bag, placed on the back of a camel or in the hull of a ship, and it could be sent on a long, long journey. Humanity had not just found sweetness. Now, for the first time in history, they had learned how to capture it. How to hold it. How to save it. The soul of the sugar cane was now a traveler. A small, sweet, humble brown crystal, ready to begin its epic and often bitter journey out of India, and across the entire world. The small, rough, brownish crystals of Khanda, the world's first sugar, began their journey. It was not a great flood of sweetness that poured out of India. It was a slow, quiet trickle. A few precious pouches at a time, carefully wrapped and protected, would be placed in the hands of traders. These were adventurous men who traveled the long, difficult, and dangerous land routes that connected the east to the west. The journey was immense. A journey of many months, even years. The sugar would travel on the backs of camels, across vast, sun-baked deserts. It would be carried over high, snowy mountain passes. It would be loaded onto small, sturdy ships that sailed the coastal waters. And as it traveled, it was heading towards a world that was already in love with a different kind of sweetness. It was heading towards the great empires of ancient Greece and Rome. And in this world, sweetness had a different name. In this world, sweetness was called honey. For the people of the West, for thousands of years, sweetness was not something that was made by human hands. It was a miracle. It was a gift delivered to the world by a tiny, magical, and tireless winged creature, the honeybee. Let us take a moment to rest in this golden world of honey. Imagine a warm, sunlit afternoon in a field of wildflowers in ancient Greece. The air is filled with the gentle, busy hum of thousands of honeybees. They move from flower to flower, from the purple lavender to the white clover, gathering the sweet, fragrant nectar. They were seen as tiny messengers flying between the heavens and the earth, collecting the sweet dew of the gods. And the honey they created was seen as liquid gold. Imagine a simple clay pot in a Roman kitchen, filled with honey. A cook dips a wooden spoon inside. The honey clings to the spoon, and as she lifts it, it drips back into the pot in a long, slow, golden, unbroken thread. It is thick and smooth and viscous. She holds the spoon to her nose. The honey does not just smell sweet. It smells of all the flowers the bees have visited. It smells of a summer meadow, of sunshine, of the very earth itself. Each jar of honey held the unique perfume of the place where it was made. And the taste was a soft, complex, and floral sweetness. It was a taste that was alive. It was the taste of nature itself. This golden, liquid sweetness was a part of their everyday lives. They would stir it into their wine to make it more pleasant. They would drizzle it over simple cakes made from wheat and nuts. They would use it to glaze roasted meats, giving them a beautiful, shiny, and delicious coating. Honey was also their most important medicine. A spoonful of honey, perhaps mixed with a little warm water and lemon, was the gentle remedy for a sore throat or a cough. Mothers would give it to their children. It was a comforting, soothing balm, used to heal small wounds and to calm an upset stomach. And honey was a food for the gods. On the mythical Mount Olympus, the Greek gods were said to drink nectar, a divine, sweet liquid. Honey was seen as the earthly version of this. People would leave small cakes sweetened with honey as offerings in their temples, a humble gift to please the heavens. Honey was more than just a food. It was a part of their culture, their medicine, their poetry, and their connection to the sacred. Honey was the undisputed, gentle, golden queen of sweetness. So, when the first rough, brownish crystals of sugar finally arrived in a Greek or Roman market, after their long and difficult journey, people were deeply puzzled. A trader from the far, far east would unveil his small, precious pouch. Inside were not golden, liquid drops, but a dry, crunchy, crystalline substance. It looked, to their eyes, like a strange, brownish kind of salt. But then he would offer a tiny taste, and the person tasting it would be shocked. It was not salty. It was sweet, intensely sweet. A clean, powerful, and very direct sweetness, with none of the floral, perfumed flavors of honey. It was a completely new experience. They did not know what to call this strange new substance. Some of the early Greek writers called it honey from reeds, because they heard stories that it came from a tall, grass-like plant in India, and they imagined that the plant, like a bee, was somehow producing a kind of dry, solid honey. Others, seeing its crystalline form, called it by a name that seemed more logical to them. They called it Indian salt. A salt that was not savory but sweet. And this new substance was incredibly, unbelievably expensive. It was one of the most expensive luxuries in the entire Roman Empire, rarer and more costly than even the most exotic spices like pepper or cloves. A single ounce of these sweet crystals might cost a Roman soldier his entire month's pay. Because of this great cost, it was certainly not a food for ordinary people. For the average person in Rome, sugar was something they might never even see in their entire lifetime, let alone taste. It was a luxury for emperors, a curiosity for the very, very rich. And for them it was not a food at all. It was a medicine. The great doctors and physicians of the time, men like Galen and Dioscorides, were fascinated by this strange Indian salt. They wrote about it in their medical books, which were the great scientific texts of their day. They did not see it as a source of pleasure, but as a powerful medicinal tool. These ancient doctors believed that the human body was made of 4 humors: hot, cold, wet, and dry. And that sickness was caused by an imbalance. They believed that sugar was a hot and moist substance, and they used it in very small, precise amounts to bring a person's body back into balance. Imagine a wealthy Roman senator feeling unwell with a weak stomach. His doctor, a learned man, would not prescribe him a spoonful of sugar. Instead, he might prepare a special tonic of bitter herbs, and into that tonic he would stir just a few tiny, precious crystals of the Indian salt, believing its hot properties would help the stomach. An orator, a great public speaker who was about to give a long speech in the Roman Senate, might be given a single tiny crystal to dissolve on his tongue, to soothe his throat and give him strength. In this world, honey was the gentle, comforting healer for the common person's cough. Sugar, on the other hand, was the sharp, powerful, and extremely expensive prescription, used by the greatest doctors for their most important and wealthy patients. So, for hundreds and hundreds of years, the two great sweeteners of the world lived in very different spheres. Honey, the golden queen, reigned supreme over the kitchens, the dinner tables, and the simple home remedies of the Western world. And sugar, the strange, crystalline visitor from the distant East, lived a quiet, mysterious, and very exclusive life, locked away in the apothecary's jar and the doctor's pouch. But a great change was coming to the world. New empires, with new ideas and a new religion, were rising in the lands between the East and the West. And these new empires had a great and powerful hunger for the sweet crystals from India. The quiet, medicinal visitor was about to be invited to the royal banquet. And from there, its long, slow, and often bitter conquest of the world would truly begin. The secret of sugar has been unlocked in the East, but in the West, it remains a rare and mysterious medicine, while golden honey reigns as the queen of sweetness. But the world is changing. Great empires fade and new ones rise, bringing with them new ideas, new tastes, and a new and powerful hunger for the sweet crystals of India. As the great Roman Empire in the West slowly crumbled and faded into the pages of history, a new and vibrant civilization was being born in the deserts of Arabia. It was a world lit by a new faith, Islam, and fueled by an incredible thirst for knowledge, for beauty, and for new ideas. This was the beginning of the Islamic Golden Age. This new civilization spread with remarkable speed, creating a vast empire that stretched from Spain in the west, across all of North Africa and the Middle East, all the way to the borders of India in the east. And unlike the Romans who had lived far away from the source of sugar, this new empire now had a direct connection to the lands where sugar was grown and made. As their traders and scholars traveled eastward, into Persia and India, they encountered the sweet, brown crystals of Khanda. And they did not see a strange medicine. They saw a miracle. They saw a substance of almost unlimited potential. The people of this golden age were masters of flavor. Their culture was rich with art, poetry, and a deep appreciation for the fine pleasures of life. Their kitchens were like magical laboratories, filled with the most wonderful and exotic ingredients from all over their vast empire. Fragrant saffron from Persia, warm cinnamon from Ceylon, delicate rosewater from Damascus. And when they discovered sugar, they welcomed it not as a medicine, but as a new and powerful tool to create flavors and textures that no one in the world had ever experienced before. Let us take a quiet walk in our minds into one of the great kitchens of this time. Perhaps we are in a palace in the magnificent city of Baghdad, the center of the world. The air in this kitchen is warm, and it is alive with the most incredible smells. You can smell the rich scent of roasting lamb, the floral perfume of orange blossom water, the earthy aroma of cumin and coriander, and now a new and wonderful smell, the sweet, caramelizing scent of heated sugar. Here, in these kitchens, the art of the modern dessert was born. And sugar was its star. The Arab chefs, the finest in the world, were like artists, and sugar was their new favorite paint. They learned to refine the rough, brown Khanda into a purer, whiter crystal. And with this they began to create wonders. They learned that if you ground almonds into a fine paste and mixed it with sugar, you created a delicious, pliable dough. We know it today as marzipan. They would sculpt this sweet dough into the shapes of beautiful fruits and flowers, so realistic you would not know they were a sweet treat until you tasted them. They learned that if you heated sugar with honey and nuts and whipped egg whites, you could create a wonderful, chewy, and airy confection. This was the beginning of nougat. They created the first true candies, boiling sugar to precise temperatures to create hard, glassy sweets flavored with ginger or mint. And they invented a whole new world of pastries. Imagine a delicate, paper-thin sheet of dough, brushed with melted butter, layered one on top of the other, filled with chopped nuts like pistachios and walnuts, and then baked until it is golden and crisp. And then, while it is still warm, it is drenched in a warm, fragrant syrup made from sugar, honey, and rosewater. This was the ancestor of the baklava we know today. It was a level of sweetness and sophistication that the West, with its simple honey cakes, could not even imagine. But they did not only use sugar for sweet things. They were masters of balancing flavors. They understood that a little bit of sweetness could make other flavors sing. They would add a pinch of sugar to a sour dish made with lemons or pomegranates, creating a beautiful harmony of sweet and sour. They would add a spoonful of sugar to their rich, savory meat stews, not to make them sweet, but to create a deep, complex, and wonderful flavor. This was a culinary wisdom that was centuries ahead of its time. And they used sugar to capture the fleeting taste of summer. They learned that if they gently cooked fresh, ripe fruits like apricots or figs, or quince with sugar, the sugar would preserve the fruit. They created the first jams and jellies and fruit preserves. They could seal the taste of a perfect summer's day in a clay jar, and open it to enjoy in the deep quiet of winter. It was a delicious and practical form of magic. The rulers of this great empire, the caliphs, would host magnificent banquets that were famous throughout the world. And on their tables, sugar was not just an ingredient, it was a form of art. The sugar masters would create incredible life-size sculptures made entirely of pure, white sugar. A visitor might see a great tree with delicate, edible leaves of spun sugar, or a perfect, miniature castle with glittering, crystalline walls. These sugar sculptures were a symbol of ultimate wealth and power. They were a way of showing that the caliph was so rich, he could afford to create mountains of a substance that was, for the rest of the world, a rare and costly medicine. And speaking of medicine, the Arab physicians, who were the most advanced and learned doctors of their time, also fell in love with sugar. But they used it in a new and compassionate way. They knew that many of their most effective herbal remedies were very bitter and unpleasant to taste. They understood that it was hard to heal a person, especially a child, with a medicine they did not want to take. So they began to mix their bitter medicines with sugar. They created the world's first pleasant-tasting remedies. They created the first true cough syrups, mixing healing herbs into a sweet, sugary liquid to soothe a cough. They created the first lozenges, mixing medicine with sugar and allowing it to harden into a small candy that a person could suck on to soothe a sore throat. They were using the pleasure of sweetness to deliver the power of healing. Because they loved sugar so much for their food, their art, and their medicine, the people of the Islamic world did not want to simply wait for it to arrive on long, slow caravans from India. They wanted to grow it themselves. And so, they became the great Johnny Appleseeds of sugar. They were master farmers and brilliant engineers of irrigation. As their empire spread, they took the precious sugarcane plant with them. They learned how to grow it in new lands. They planted it in the rich, fertile soil of Egypt, along the banks of the great river Nile. They planted it across the warm lands of North Africa. And, for the very first time in history, they brought sugarcane cultivation to Europe itself. They planted it on the sunny islands of the Mediterranean, like Sicily and Cyprus. And they created vast, beautiful sugarcane fields in the south of Spain. They were creating a great and powerful empire of sugar. So, in this brilliant and learned civilization, sugar was completely transformed. It was no longer a strange and foreign doctor's prescription. It was now a celebrated ingredient in the world's finest kitchens. It was a breathtaking art form on the tables of kings. It was a gentle comfort in the world of medicine. And it was a precious and important crop, its green stalks now growing thousands of miles from its original island home. The rest of Europe, the Christian West, still slept, mostly unaware of this sweet revolution that was happening just across the sea. The memory of Rome had faded, and the great cities were smaller, the knowledge more fragmented. Honey was still their gentle, golden queen. But the stage of the world was now set for a great and dramatic encounter. The sugar was no longer a distant myth from faraway India. It was now growing right on the very doorstep of Europe, waiting for the next great and turbulent event in history that would finally, and forever, bring it into the light. We have left the story of sugar in a world of great sophistication and learning. In the Islamic Golden Age, sugar was transformed into an art form, a gourmet ingredient, and a gentle medicine. It was cultivated and enjoyed across a vast empire that stretched to the very edges of Europe. Meanwhile, the rest of Europe slept on, its world still sweetened only by the golden taste of honey. But a great and turbulent event was about to shake the world and throw these two cultures together. And in the midst of this clash, the West would finally be introduced to the true power of sweetness. In the lands to the north of the Mediterranean Sea, in the kingdoms of Europe, life was different. The grand memory of the Roman Empire had faded into myth. It was a world of stone castles with cold, damp walls. It was a world of thick, dark forests, where ancient fears and legends still lingered. It was, for most people, a simpler, smaller, and often harder way of life. Their world of flavor was also small and familiar. It was a world of simple, honest taste. The saltiness of cured meat and fish, the sourness of vinegar and fermented foods, the bitterness of wild herbs gathered from the forest floor. And for sweetness, for a taste of joy and comfort, there was only their old and trusted friend, honey. Honey on their bread, honey in their ale, honey as a medicine, honey as a rare and precious treat. Their world was a world of gold, not of white. But a great and powerful idea, an idea that would change the course of history, began to sweep across these lands. From the great city of Rome, the leaders of the Christian church called out to the kings, the knights, the nobles, and the common people of Europe. They called for a great and holy pilgrimage, a journey of thousands of miles, to the sacred Holy Land in the Middle East. And so, great armies of men from the green fields of France, from the misty shores of England, and from the dark forests of Germany, began a long, long march to the east. These men were called crusaders. They were not traders seeking new goods, or scholars seeking new knowledge. They were soldiers marching for their faith. And they were marching into a world that was completely, utterly unknown to them. Let us imagine we are one of these men. A simple knight, perhaps, from a small castle in the countryside of France. Your whole life has been spent in the cool, green hills of your home. Now you are on the greatest adventure of your life. You march for months across lands you have only heard of in stories. The sun is hotter than any you have ever known. The landscapes are dry and dusty. The stars at night are different. Everything is strange. Everything is new. After a long and difficult journey, you finally arrive in the Holy Land. This is the world we visited in our last chapter. The world of the caliphs. It is a world of incredible sights. Great cities with beautiful mosques and bustling markets. Foods and spices you have never seen or smelled before. And here, in the fields outside a captured city, you see something that puzzles you. You see vast fields of a strange, tall plant, like a giant green reed, growing in neat, orderly rows. You have never seen anything like it in your home in France. Let us imagine we are one of these men. A simple knight, perhaps, from a small castle in the countryside of France. Your whole life has been spent in the cool, green hills of your home. Now you are on the greatest adventure of your life. You march for months across lands you have only heard of in stories. The sun is hotter than any you have ever known. The landscapes are dry and dusty. The stars at night are different. Everything is strange. Everything is new. After a long and difficult journey, you finally arrive in the Holy Land. This is the world we visited in our last chapter. The world of the caliphs. It is a world of incredible sights. Great cities with beautiful mosques and bustling markets. Foods and spices you have never seen or smelled before. And here, in the fields outside a captured city, you see something that puzzles you. You see vast fields of a strange, tall plant, like a giant green reed, growing in neat, orderly rows. You have never seen anything like it in your home in France. You see the local people, the Saracens as you call them, who work these fields. You watch them as they cut down one of the tall, green stalks. And then they do something very simple. They put a piece of the stalk in their mouth and they begin to chew on it. And as they chew, a look of simple, happy pleasure comes across their faces. Your army is tired and hungry and thirsty. The water is not always good. The food is bland and unfamiliar. Your curiosity is piqued. What is the secret of this tall grass? One day you take a piece for yourself. It is tough and fibrous. You put it in your mouth and begin to chew just as you saw the local people do. And in that moment, a shock of pure, clean, incredible sweetness floods your mouth. It is a sweetness far more intense, far more powerful, than any honey you have ever tasted in your life. It is like tasting a drop of pure, liquid joy. You feel a burst of energy, a lifting of your weary spirits. You share your discovery with your fellow soldiers. And soon many of the crusaders are chewing on the sweet reeds, as a special treat, a small moment of pleasure in a hard and dangerous life. But this is only the beginning of your discovery. Later your army captures a great port city like Tripoli or Tyre. And as you walk through the marketplace, you encounter the true treasure. You see a merchant sitting behind a stall. And on his stall are not rough, green stalks, but what looks like small cones or lumps of a brownish, crystalline substance. You are told that this is a special, sweet salt, a powder made by a secret process from the juice of the tall, sweet reeds. You trade a small silver coin for a tiny, precious lump of it. It is hard and crunchy. You place a small piece on your tongue. The sweetness is even more powerful, even more pure than the juice from the stalk. It dissolves on your tongue, a clean, wonderful, and absolutely delightful taste. For you, a man from the simple honey-sweetened world of the North, this is a revelation. It is the taste of paradise. It is a true treasure from this strange and magical land of the East. The Crusades were a long and difficult time, lasting for nearly 200 years. Many knights and soldiers spent years, even decades, living in the Holy Land. And as they lived there, they grew accustomed to the local foods. They developed a taste, a craving for this new and wonderful sweetness. Sugar became a part of their lives. And when these knights and soldiers finally returned home to Europe, if they were lucky enough to survive the long journey back, they brought with them more than just scars and stories of battles. They brought back the memory of a taste. Some even managed to bring back a small, precious pouch of the crystalline sugar, a wondrous and incredibly expensive souvenir to show their families and their lords. Imagine a knight, home in his cold, stone castle, allowing his children to taste a single tiny crystal of sugar for the first time. It would have been a moment of pure magic. It was as if the Crusaders had opened a tiny window in a dark room, and for the first time, a brilliant, sweet sliver of light had shone through. The people of Europe had now had their first true taste of sugar. And it was a taste they would never, ever forget. A great and powerful craving had been born. A demand was created. All across Europe, the kings, the queens, the nobles, the rich who had heard these stories and tasted these first samples, now wanted more of this incredible sweet salt from the East. The Crusades were a time of great and terrible conflict. But they were also a time of great and unintended exchange. And one of the most lasting and world-changing things that traveled from the East back to the West was not a king or a crown, but the memory of a taste. The taste of pure, crystalline sweetness. The demand was now there. The market was now ready. And in the great, rich trading cities of Italy, the merchants of Venice were listening very, very carefully. They saw an opportunity. An opportunity to control the flow of this new, precious, and highly desired treasure. The next chapter in our bittersweet story was about to begin. The great armies of the Crusades have returned to Europe, and they have brought with them a powerful new memory, the taste of sugar. A great craving has been born across the land. But the source of this new treasure is far away in the lands of the East. The stage is now set for a new power to rise, a city of merchants that will build an empire on this sweet desire. The great craving for sugar had awakened in Europe. The kings, queens, and wealthy nobles who had tasted this new wonderful sweetness now wanted more. But it was a difficult and precious thing to get. The path to the sugar lands of the East was long and dangerous, and it passed through the territory of the great Arab empires. But there was one city in Europe that was different from all the others. A city that did not look inward but outward. A city that was not built on solid ground, but seemed to float magically on the waters of a calm lagoon. This was the great and powerful city of Venice. Imagine Venice in this time. It is a city of canals, not roads. Instead of the clatter of horse-drawn carts, there is only the gentle, quiet splash of oars in the water. Elegant, silent boats called gondolas glide through the liquid streets, passing by magnificent palaces that rise directly from the water's edge, their stone feet forever washed by the tide. It was a city that understood the sea. It was a city of master sailors, of adventurous merchants, and of clever diplomats. And the merchants of Venice were watching the world very, very carefully. They saw the Great Crusades, not just as a holy war, but as a great and turbulent event that was changing the world. And they saw the new and powerful hunger for Eastern luxuries that the Crusaders had brought back with them. A hunger for spices like pepper and cinnamon. And most of all, a hunger for sugar. The Venetian merchants were in a perfect position. For centuries, they had been the great bridge between the Christian world of Europe and the Islamic world of the East. While other European kingdoms were at war, the Venetians were making friends. They were friends with the great sultans of Egypt and Syria. They did not care about politics or religion as much as they cared about one thing: trade. They saw the new European craving for sugar, and they created a simple, brilliant, and powerful plan. They would become the sole gatekeepers of sweetness for the entire continent. Their great, tall ships, with their billowing white sails, were the finest in the world. They filled the Venetian harbor like a great, leafless forest. These ships would sail from the quiet lagoon of Venice, across the wide, blue Mediterranean Sea, to the bustling, rich port cities of the East, like Alexandria in Egypt, or Acre in the Holy Land. Imagine a Venetian merchant in one of these great foreign cities. The air is thick with the smell of exotic spices and roasting coffee. The merchant is not here as a conqueror. He is here as a welcome guest. He meets with the Arab traders, and because of Venice's special relationship, he is able to buy the treasures of the East in enormous quantities. He buys chests of pepper, bales of silk, and most importantly, he buys the sugar. The sugar that arrived in these ports was still the rough, brownish crystals, often packed into large cone-shaped loaves. The Venetians would buy as much of it as their ships could carry. Then began the long, quiet journey home. Imagine one of these great Venetian galleys, its belly full of precious cargo, sailing silently under a sky full of stars. The only sounds are the creaking of the ship's timbers, the soft flap of the sails, and the gentle lapping of the waves against the hull. The sweet, crystalline treasure is making its slow, quiet journey to its new home. When the ship finally arrived back in the Venetian lagoon, the sugar was carefully unloaded onto smaller boats and taken to the city's great warehouses. But the Venetian genius was that they did not simply sell this raw brown sugar. They decided to perfect it. In quiet, secret workshops, hidden away in the city's maze of canals, the Venetians built Europe's first great sugar refineries. They were like alchemists turning a rough, brown stone into a pure, white jewel. Inside these warm, sweet-smelling workshops, the process was a closely guarded secret. They would take the rough, brown sugar loaves that had arrived from the East. They would break them up and dissolve them in water. Then, through a secret process, perhaps using things like egg whites, they would clarify the syrup, removing all the impurities, all the brown molasses until the liquid was perfectly clear. Then they would let this pure syrup cool and crystallize once more, in special cone-shaped molds. And what came out of these molds was something Europe had never seen before. It was sugar that was perfectly, dazzlingly white. As white as the purest snow. It was a substance of incredible beauty and intense sweetness. This was Venice's great invention. They had taken the raw material of the East and perfected it. This pure, white sugar was now the most luxurious, the most desirable, and by far the most expensive sugar in the entire world. Venice now controlled not just the supply of sugar, but also the very finest quality of it. Now the final part of their plan could begin. The rest of Europe wanted sugar, and Venice was the only place to get it. Merchants from all over the continent, from England and France, and the Holy Roman Empire, now had to make the long journey to Venice. Imagine a German merchant, arriving at the great Rialto market in Venice. He is surrounded by incredible wealth. He sees the pure, white cones of sugar, stacked like precious treasures. And he knows that if he wants to bring this magical substance back to the wealthy nobles of his own country, he must pay whatever price the Venetians ask. And the price was very, very high. Venice held the key to the world of sweetness, and they charged a fortune to unlock the door. The price of sugar all across Europe was whatever Venice said it was. This monopoly made the city of Venice fabulously, unimaginably wealthy. The great merchant families built magnificent palaces that seemed to float on the water, their windows filled with light, their walls covered in beautiful paintings. The great artists of the Renaissance were funded by this wealth. The beautiful city of Venice, which we can still marvel at today, many of its marble stones and golden treasures were paid for with the immense profits from this sweet, white, precious crystal. For nearly 200 years, from the 1300s to the late 1400s, Venice was the undisputed sugar capital of the world. It was a city built on water and it was powered by sweetness. They had taken a rare Eastern medicine and turned it into a European obsession, an obsession that they and they alone could satisfy. But a monopoly, a position of total control, never lasts forever. Other great nations like Portugal and Spain looked at Venice's incredible wealth with jealous eyes. They began to dream. They dreamed of finding their own way to the lands of spices and sugar. They dreamed of bypassing the powerful Venetian gatekeepers. And so they began to look not to the east but in a different, more daring direction. They began to look west, out across the great, dark, unknown Atlantic Ocean. A new age of exploration, of discovery, and of conquest was about to begin. And the story of sugar was about to enter its most dramatic and its most bitter chapter yet. The pure, snow-white sugar, perfected in the secret workshops of Venice, began its slow and very expensive journey north. It was carried over the high, cold passes of the Alps, and down the long, winding rivers of France and Germany, and across the choppy waters to England. It was a treasure so costly that it was kept under lock and key, in the same strong boxes that held the royal jewels and the state's gold. In this world, sugar was a treasure that only the very, very rich could afford. And in this world, the richest and most powerful of all were the kings, the queens, and the great noble dukes and lords. Let us imagine we are inside the kitchens of a great royal castle in the 1400s. It is a vast, cavernous room with stone walls, filled with the heat and smoke from several enormous fireplaces. In one corner, a whole ox is being roasted on a great spit. In another, cooks are busy preparing dozens of savory meat pies. But in a small, separate room there is a special locked cabinet. This is the spice cabinet. And inside, in small, precious, sealed containers, are the treasures from the East, the dark, fragrant sticks of cinnamon, the tiny, hard pebbles of black pepper, and the most precious of all, a cone of pure, white Venetian sugar. The royal cook, a man of great importance, has the key to this cabinet. For a great feast, the king might grant him permission to use a small amount of the sugar. But he would not use it to bake a sweet cake, or to make a dessert as we know it. No, he would use it as a spice. A very, very special spice. He might take a tiny amount of the white powder and mix it with other rare spices like ginger and cloves. And he would use this mixture to sprinkle over a great, magnificent roasted peacock, its feathers reattached to make a stunning centerpiece for the royal table. To have your savory meat dish lightly frosted with this sweet, white powder was a sign of incredible wealth. It was a way of showing your guests that you were so rich, you could afford to sprinkle your dinner with a substance that was more costly than the spices it was mixed with. The king's personal doctor would also have a small, carefully guarded supply of the precious sugar. He would use it, as the Arab physicians had, to make the king's bitter herbal medicines easier to swallow. For a king to have his medicine sweetened with sugar was a luxury that no common person in the land could even dream of. But soon the kings and queens of Europe, in their constant glittering competition to impress and outdo one another, discovered a new and even more wonderful way to use sugar. They realized that it was more than a spice. It was a building material. It could be melted and molded and sculpted. It could be turned into art. And so began the age of the great sugar sculptures. They decided to display their immense wealth not just by eating a tiny amount of the sugar, but by creating magnificent, breathtaking, edible artworks for their banquet tables. In the deep, warm kitchens of the royal palaces, a new kind of artist was born. He was not a painter or a stone carver. He was the royal sugar master, a craftsman of incredible and delicate skill. Let us imagine we are watching one of these masters at work. He begins with the pure, white Venetian sugar. He carefully melts it in a large, clean copper pot, over a very gentle, steady fire. He watches it with intense focus. He cannot let it get too hot or it will turn brown and bitter. He must warm it just enough, until it transforms from a white crystal into a clear, thick, bubbling liquid, as transparent as molten glass. Now his artistry can begin. He might pour this hot liquid sugar into intricate molds, which have been beautifully carved from wood or cast in plaster. The molds might be in the shape of a lion or a dragon or a tiny, perfect castle tower. He must work quickly before the sugar cools and hardens. He might also take the liquid sugar and spin it. By dipping a fork or a special tool into the syrup and flinging it, he can create impossibly thin, delicate threads of sugar, like the silk of a spider's web, or the finest golden hair. He is also a painter. He can add natural colors to his liquid sugar to turn it into an edible paint. He might add a tiny pinch of precious saffron, turning the sugar into a brilliant, shining gold. Or the juice of spinach, to create a vibrant, living green. Or the juice of beets to make a deep, royal red. With these skills, the sugar master could create almost anything his king could imagine. Now let us leave the hot kitchens and enter the great banquet hall. Imagine a vast stone hall, lit by the gentle flickering light of 1,000 beeswax candles. The air is filled with music from minstrels, and the scent of roasted meats and fine wine. Long tables are covered in white linen cloths. And on these tables are the sugar master's incredible creations. They were called subtleties, and they were wonders to behold. In the very center of the king's high table, there might stand a magnificent white castle. It has tall, slender towers, strong walls, and tiny, perfect flags flying from the turrets. There are knights on horseback guarding the gates, and a beautiful princess looking out from a high window. And the entire thing, every stone, every flag, every tiny, perfect knight, is made of pure, shining sugar. Further down the table, there might be a scene from an old and famous story. Perhaps a great, proud swan, its body made of pure white sugar, and its feathers made from thousands of threads of delicate spun sugar, so fine they seem to tremble in the candlelight. It seems to be swimming on a lake made of hardened sugar that has been colored a beautiful, translucent blue. On another table there is an entire, edible forest. The trees have green sugar leaves. The ground is a carpet of crumbled brown sugar. And hiding among the trees are small, perfect sugar animals, a gentle deer, a swift rabbit, a cunning fox, all frozen in a moment of time. The incredible thing to remember about these amazing sugar sculptures was that they were not really meant to be eaten. They were a form of theater. They were a performance. They were a way for the king or queen to communicate a message to all of their powerful guests. And that message was simple. The sugar castle on the table silently said, "Look how powerful I am. Look how wealthy I am. I am so rich that I can afford to build a beautiful castle out of a substance that is, for most of the world, more precious than gold, and I will simply put it on my table for you to look at while you eat." It was the ultimate display of status. An act of magnificent, sweet, and edible power. At the very end of the great feast, sometimes the king would make a grand gesture. He would take a small ceremonial hammer, and he would theatrically smash one of the smaller sugar sculptures. And the small, broken pieces would be given to the most honored guests, a party favor of almost unimaginable value. To go home with a piece of the king's sugar swan was a sign of great favor. So, in the great, glittering courts of late medieval Europe, sugar had completed its strange transformation. It had arrived as a rare doctor's medicine. It had become a precious spice for the royal cook. And now it had reached its final, highest form. It was the ultimate symbol of royal power, unimaginable wealth, and exquisite, edible art. It was not a food. It was a statement. This age of sugar artistry was beautiful, but it was built on a foundation of extreme rarity and immense cost. The kings had their sugar castles, but the common people, the farmers and the workers of the land, had never even seen it, let alone tasted it. This incredible imbalance could not last forever. A great, silent hunger for sweetness was growing throughout the world, and the only way to satisfy it was to find more of this white gold, much, much more. The eyes of the ambitious new kingdoms of Europe, like Portugal and Spain, were beginning to turn away from the old Venetian-controlled trade routes. They were beginning to look not to the east, but to the west, out across the great, dark, unknown waters of the Atlantic Ocean. A new age of exploration was dawning. And the story of sugar was about to enter its most consequential, its most dramatic, and its most bitter chapter yet. For nearly 200 years, the beautiful city of Venice was the master of sweetness. It held the keys to the sugar trade, and the rest of Europe, with its growing craving for the white crystals, had no choice but to pay Venice's very high prices. The kings and queens of other great nations, like Portugal and Spain, looked at the magnificent palaces of Venice with jealous eyes. They knew that this incredible wealth was built on the trade of Eastern luxuries, spices, and sugar. A new and powerful dream began to form in the minds of the sailors, the map-makers, and the rulers of these nations. It was a dream of finding a new path, a new way to reach the fabled Spice Islands and the sugar lands of the East, a way that did not require them to pass through the gates of Venice. They dreamed of a sea path. But in this time the world map was a thing of great mystery. It was full of empty spaces and warnings of "here be dragons." To the west of Europe, There was only a great, vast, and terrifying body of water. They called it the Sea of Darkness. No one knew what lay on the other side. Most believed there was nothing but an endless, empty ocean. But into this world of restless dreams and great fears came a man. An Italian sailor from the city of Genoa, named Christopher Columbus. He was a man of the sea, a master navigator, but he was also a man obsessed with a single, powerful, and, to many, a very foolish idea. He believed, as some of the ancient Greeks had, that the world was not flat. He believed it was a round sphere. And he believed with all his heart that if he sailed west, far enough across the great unknown sea of darkness, he would not fall off the edge of the world. He believed he would eventually, inevitably, arrive in the east. He would arrive in the lands of India and China and Japan, the lands of silk and spice and sugar. It was a beautiful and simple idea, but it was a terrifying one. He went from royal court to royal court, trying to find a king or queen who would be brave enough to fund his dangerous voyage. The King of Portugal said no. Others laughed at him. But Columbus was a man of incredible persistence. Finally, the King and Queen of Spain, Ferdinand and Isabella, after years of hesitation, agreed to his plan. They gave him 3 small wooden ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. And in August of 1492, Christopher Columbus set sail from Spain, heading west into the great, blue, terrifying unknown. Imagine that journey. The 3 small, fragile ships, alone in the middle of a vast, endless ocean. 4 weeks and weeks, the sailors saw nothing but water and sky. The only sounds were the constant creaking of the ship's wooden timbers, the snap of the wind in the sails, and the slow, rhythmic rush of the waves against the hull. The sailors grew afraid. They were lost in a world without landmarks. But Columbus, guided by his great and stubborn dream, insisted they sail on. And then one night, a sailor high up on the mast saw a faint light in the distance. And in the morning they heard the joyful cry, "Land! Land!" On the horizon was a line of green. An island. Columbus had done it. He had crossed the great ocean. He believed, with all his heart, that he had arrived in the East Indies. He had found the path. But as he explored these new lands, a quiet disappointment began to grow. The people he met were not the merchants of India. There were no great cities of gold. There were no markets selling silks and spices. He had found a new world, but it was not the rich, old world he was looking for. He returned to Spain a great hero, but he had not brought back the treasures he had promised. He was determined to try again. And so, a year later, in 1493, Columbus set sail for a second time. This time it was very different. He did not go with just 3 small ships. He led a great fleet of 17 ships, a floating city carrying over 1,000 men. He was not just an explorer anymore. He was a colonizer. He was a builder. He was bringing the old world to the new. The bellies of these great ships were like a floating version of Spain. They carried soldiers and farmers and priests and craftsmen. They carried animals that the New World had never seen: horses, cattle, sheep, and pigs. And, most importantly for our story, they carried a kind of botanical ark. A carefully chosen collection of the Old World's most precious plants. They brought the seeds for wheat and barley to make bread. They brought cuttings from grapevines to grow grapes and make wine. They brought olive trees and citrus trees. And, carefully protected in a special humidified crate, Columbus himself carried a few short, precious cuttings of sugarcane. He had gotten them from the Canary Islands, a place where the Spanish had already been learning the difficult art of sugar cultivation. He knew how valuable this plant was. And he dreamed of planting it in this new land he had found, this land which he still believed was the East Indies. The great fleet arrived in the Caribbean, at the large, beautiful island that Columbus named Hispaniola. Today it is the land of Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Imagine the scene. A group of Spanish farmers under the warm, tropical sun, standing on the rich, dark, virgin soil of this new island. The air is humid and sweet-smelling, not unlike the ancient home of the sugarcane in New Guinea. With great care, a farmer digs a small trench in the fertile earth. He takes a piece of the sugarcane stalk, a cutting from the old world, and he lays it gently in the soil. He covers it over. He gives it water from a nearby stream. It is a simple, quiet, hopeful act. An act of planting. But it is one of the most consequential and most fateful acts in the entire history of the world. Because what happened next was a miracle for the Spanish, and the beginning of a great tragedy for this new land. The sugar cane, which had made a journey of 10,000 years from New Guinea to India to the Middle East, to the islands of the Mediterranean, had finally found its perfect, ultimate home. It loved this new world. In the warm, constant Caribbean sun, in the rich and fertile soil that had never been farmed, and with the plentiful tropical rains, the sugar cane did not just grow. It exploded. It grew with a power and a speed that astonished the Spanish planters. It grew faster and taller and thicker and juicier than it had ever grown in the Old World. It was as if the plant, after its long journey around the world, had finally come home to a paradise that had been made just for it. A quiet realization began to dawn on Columbus and his men. He had sailed west to find the known spices and riches of the East. In that he had failed. But in this simple act of planting, he had accidentally done something far more significant. He had not found the treasure. He had brought the treasure with him. He had brought the white gold of sugar to a place where it could be grown on a scale that the world had never ever seen before. The meeting of the sugarcane plant and the soil of the Caribbean was a perfect match. A sweet paradise was now possible. Vast, endless fields of this green gold could now be planted, enough to satisfy the great and growing hunger of all of Europe. But this sweet paradise would soon require a terrible price. These endless fields of green gold would soon create a new and terrible and insatiable hunger. A hunger not for sugar, but for people. A hunger for millions of hands to do the hard, back-breaking, relentless work of planting and cutting and harvesting the cane. The simple, hopeful act of planting a single stalk of sugar cane in a new land had unknowingly planted the seeds of a great and bitter tragedy. The sweetest of dreams was about to create the darkest of nightmares. The seeds of a new world have been planted. An ancient grass from the east has found a perfect new home in the west. A sweet paradise is now possible. But every paradise in our human story seems to come with a hidden price. Let us now explore the beautiful sun-drenched islands that became the heart of the world's new sugar empire. The news spread like wildfire back in the great capitals of Europe. It was carried on the lips of sailors returning from the New World. It was written in the letters of explorers and adventurers. A paradise had been found. Not a paradise of gold and silver as they had first dreamed, but a different kind of paradise. A green paradise. A place where the soil was so rich, the sun so warm, and the rain so plentiful, that the precious sugarcane plant grew with an almost magical power. The first small, experimental plantings on the islands of the Caribbean had been a wild success. The sugarcane cuttings that Columbus had so carefully brought across the ocean had thrived beyond anyone's wildest dreams. The potential for wealth was staggering. A new dream was born. The dream of the Sugar Islands. Let us travel there now in our minds. Let us imagine we are on a tall sailing ship, having just crossed the great Atlantic Ocean. And we see one of these islands for the first time. Perhaps it is the island of Barbados or Jamaica. The first thing you feel is the air. The air is warm and soft and it feels gentle on your skin. It carries the clean, salty smell of the ocean, mixed with the sweet, heavy perfume of 1,000 different kinds of tropical flowers you have never seen before. The beaches that ring the island are made of fine, white sand, as soft as sugar itself. And the water of the sea is a clear, brilliant turquoise, so clear you can see the colorful fish swimming in the coral reefs below. Gentle, green hills roll inland from the coast. In these early days, they are still covered in lush, tropical forests, alive with the sound of parrots and hummingbirds. It is a vision of a perfect, untouched, natural paradise. A place of peace and incredible beauty. But as our ship sails closer, we begin to see the signs of the great change that is coming to this land. Carved out of the green hills are vast, geometric patches of a different kind of green. These are the great new fields of sugarcane. They stretch for miles and miles in every direction. A vast, waving, shimmering, green ocean of grass, covering the gentle slopes of the island. It is a beautiful and an almost hypnotic sight. When the warm, steady trade winds blow in from the sea, a gentle, rustling, whispering sound, a soft travels across the whole field like a great green wave rolling silently across the land. The tall stalks, heavy with the sweet, watery juice inside, sway together in a slow, graceful dance. Their long green leaves shimmer and flash in the hot, tropical sun. It is a picture of perfect agricultural beauty, a picture of immense and growing wealth. High on a hill, overlooking these vast fields of green, stands the great house. This is the new home of the European plantation owner. It is a large, elegant house, often built of stone with wide, shaded porches, called verandas, that are designed to catch the cool sea breeze. From this high porch, the owner can look out upon his entire kingdom of green. He can watch his wealth grow stalk by tall stalk under the warm sun. His life here is one of great comfort and luxury, surrounded by the breathtaking beauty of his island paradise. Below the great house, closer to the fields, we can see the heart of the operation. We can see the mill. In these early days, the mills are often powered by the natural forces of the island. Perhaps it is a beautiful, tall windmill, its great, white cloth-covered arms turning slowly and gracefully and powerfully in the constant, steady winds that blow across the sea. Or perhaps it is an animal mill. A long wooden arm extends from a central crushing machine, and attached to that arm is a team of slow, patient, plodding oxen or mules. They walk in an endless, quiet circle, their great strength turning the heavy rollers of the mill. And from the mill, you can hear a constant, rhythmic, groaning sound. It is the sound of the great rollers, made of stone or heavy wood, crushing the life out of the harvested sugarcane stalks, squeezing out every last drop of the precious, sweet juice. A sticky, gray-green river of juice flows out from the mill, collected into large troughs. And next to the mill there is a long, low building with a tall stone chimney. This is the boiling house. From the top of the chimney, a soft, white plume of sweet-smelling steam is always rising into the clear, blue sky. This is the hot, beating heart of the plantation. This is the place where the raw juice from the mill is transformed, through the magic of fire and heat, into the raw brown sugar crystals that will be packed into barrels and sent across the ocean. The great house on the hill, looking down in quiet comfort. The vast, waving green fields of cane, shimmering in the sun. The slow, constant turning of the mill. And the sweet-smelling steam rising from the boiling house. Together, all of these things formed a single, powerful, and incredibly profitable machine. A great, green machine for turning sunlight and soil and rain into what was now being called white gold. It was a paradise. A perfect picture of wealth and industry and natural beauty. But, if you looked closer, if you listened more carefully, past the gentle rustle of the cane leaves and the soft lapping of the turquoise sea, you might begin to notice that this sweet paradise was built upon something that was not beautiful at all. The constant, rhythmic, groaning sound of the mill was not the sound of gentle work. It was the sound of a relentless, never-ending demand for more and more and more cane to crush. The sweet-smelling steam that rose from the boiling house was the hot, heavy breath of a place of incredible, dangerous, and exhausting heat, where men worked around the clock next to giant, bubbling cauldrons of boiling syrup. And the vast, beautiful, waving green fields, they did not plant themselves. The heavy cane did not cut itself down. It did not carry itself to the mill. All of this required work. Hard, back-breaking, relentless, endless work, all performed under the hot, direct, and unforgiving tropical sun. This sweet paradise had a terrible, silent secret. It was a paradise that could not exist on its own. It was a beautiful machine that needed to be fed. And it had a great and a terrible and a growing hunger. A hunger that would soon stretch across the entire ocean and change the world forever. The Sugar Islands. They were given beautiful names like Jewels, Jamaica, Barbados, Cuba, Hispaniola. They became the glittering, sweet center of the world's new obsession with sugar. They were the powerful engine of a new global economy, producing a treasure that the people of Europe, from the richest kings to the growing middle class, could not seem to get enough of. But an engine needs fuel to run. A paradise needs a foundation to be built upon. And as the demand for more and more sugar grew louder and louder, the hunt for that fuel, for that foundation, was about to begin in deadly earnest. The story of the sweet paradise was about to reveal its bitter and tragic human cost. We have left our story in a place of breathtaking beauty and of quiet dread. A sweet paradise, the Sugar Islands, that held a dark and unspoken secret. A great and terrible hunger for work. The question that hung in the warm, humid, tropical air was a simple and a brutal one. Who would do this work? To understand the answer, we must first understand the work itself. We must understand what it took to turn the green stalks of the sugarcane plant into the sweet, white crystals that were so desired in Europe. The work was a cycle, a relentless rhythm that was dictated by the sun and the seasons. It began with the planting. Imagine a great field, stretching to the horizon, that has been cleared of its ancient forest. The earth is rich and dark, but it has been baked hard by the tropical sun. The first job was to dig the holes for the cane cuttings. Not with a machine but by hand. Line after line of men and women, standing under the direct, burning sun, would lift heavy iron hoes. Again, and again, and again, they would strike the hard earth, digging thousands of holes in long, perfectly straight rows. The only sound was the rhythmic thud of the hoes, and the heavy breathing of the workers. It was exhausting, back-breaking work. Once the holes were dug, the cane cuttings were planted by hand, one by one. And then the long wait began. But it was not a restful wait. As the young sugarcane shoots began to grow, so did the weeds. The work of weeding was endless. 4 months, the workers would have to move slowly through the fields, bent over, pulling the choking weeds from around the base of the delicate cane plants. The leaves of the sugarcane itself were sharp, like long blades of grass, and they would leave small, stinging cuts on the workers' hands and arms. And then, after nearly a year and a half of patient, difficult work, the cane was finally tall and ripe, and heavy with its sweet juice. The harvest could begin. The harvest, known as the crop over, or the cane cutting, was the hardest and most dangerous time of all. We have left our story in a place of breathtaking beauty and of quiet dread. A sweet paradise, the Sugar Islands, that held a dark and unspoken secret. A great and terrible hunger for work. The question that hung in the warm, humid, tropical air was a simple and a brutal one. Who would do this work? To understand the answer, we must first understand the work itself. We must understand what it took to turn the green stalks of the sugarcane plant into the sweet, white crystals that were so desired in Europe. The work was a cycle, a relentless rhythm that was dictated by the sun and the seasons. It began with the planting. Imagine a great field, stretching to the horizon, that has been cleared of its ancient forest. The earth is rich and dark, but it has been baked hard by the tropical sun. The first job was to dig the holes for the cane cuttings. Not with a machine but by hand. Line after line of men and women, standing under the direct, burning sun, would lift heavy iron hoes. Again, and again, and again, they would strike the hard earth, digging thousands of holes in long, perfectly straight rows. The only sound was the rhythmic thud of the hoes, and the heavy breathing of the workers. It was exhausting, back-breaking work. Once the holes were dug, the cane cuttings were planted by hand, one by one. And then the long wait began. But it was not a restful wait. As the young sugarcane shoots began to grow, so did the weeds. The work of weeding was endless. 4 months, the workers would have to move slowly through the fields, bent over, pulling the choking weeds from around the base of the delicate cane plants. The leaves of the sugarcane itself were sharp, like long blades of grass, and they would leave small, stinging cuts on the workers' hands and arms. And then, after nearly a year and a half of patient, difficult work, the cane was finally tall and ripe, and heavy with its sweet juice. The harvest could begin. The harvest, known as the crop over, or the cane cutting, was the hardest and most dangerous time of all. Imagine a mature sugarcane field now. It is no longer an open field. It is a dense, tall, green jungle. The stalks stand close together, over 10 feet high, and the sharp leaves block out the sun and the breeze. The air inside the cane field is hot and still and thick, and it is filled with insects and other creatures. The workers, men and women, would enter this green jungle at sunrise. Their only tool was a heavy, long and very sharp knife like a machete. And the work began. The rhythm of the harvest was brutal and unchanging. You would reach down and grab a stalk of the heavy cane. With one powerful swing of the heavy knife, you would cut the stalk at its very base close to the ground. Swish, thud. Then with another swift cut, you would chop off the green leafy top. Swish, thud. Then you would lay the heavy, cut stalk on the ground and immediately move to the next one. Swish, thud. Swish, thud. This was the sound of the harvest from the moment the sun rose to the moment it set. An endless, exhausting rhythm, performed in the suffocating heat of the cane field. And the work was not done. These heavy, cut stalks had to be bundled together and loaded by hand onto large carts, which were pulled by teams of tired mules or oxen, to be taken to the mill. The mill was a hungry beast, and it could never be allowed to stop. Once the harvest began, the mill had to be fed with cane 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This was because as soon as a stalk of sugar cane is cut, the precious sugar inside it begins to spoil. It was a frantic, desperate race against time. So who would do this terrible, relentless work? The first people the European planters tried to force into this labor were the native people of the islands, the gentle Taino and the Carib peoples. They were the ones who had lived in this paradise for 1,000 years. But they were not farmers in this organized, industrial way. Their bodies were not used to this kind of relentless sun-up to sundown labor. And even more tragically, they had no defense, no immunity, to the new and strange diseases that the Europeans had unknowingly brought with them across the ocean. A simple cold for a European could be a deadly illness for a Taino person. Within a few short decades of Columbus's arrival, through a combination of being overworked and the terrible spread of new diseases, almost all of the native people of these paradise islands were gone. It was a great and a silent and a terrible tragedy. The planters were now desperate. They had a paradise of sugar but no one to work it. So they looked back to their own homes, back to Europe. They brought over poor and desperate people from England and Ireland and Scotland. These people were called indentured servants. They were not slaves, but they were not free. They would sign a contract, agreeing to work for a plantation owner for a number of years, usually 5 or 7 years, without pay. In exchange, they were given passage on a ship to the New World, and the promise of a small piece of land for themselves, if they survived their term of service. But the work in the sugar fields was too hard. The tropical sun was too hot and too cruel for the fair-skinned Europeans. And they too had no immunity to the tropical diseases of the Caribbean, like malaria and yellow fever, which were carried by mosquitoes. Many of these poor indentured servants did not survive their 7 years. They died from overwork and from sickness. And those who did survive, once they were finally free, wanted nothing more to do with the sugar fields. They wanted their own small piece of land as far away from the backbreaking labor of the cane as they could get. This was not a lasting solution for the plantation owners. So, the great and terrible problem remained. The planters had a paradise. They had endless acres of rich, fertile land. They had a perfect, warm climate. And they had a crop that was worth a fortune. A crop that Europe was screaming for. But they needed a workforce. A massive workforce. A workforce that could, they hoped, survive the heat and the diseases of the tropics. A workforce that could perform the brutal, physical labor, day after day, year after year. And, in their greedy and calculating minds, they wanted a workforce that was cheap. Or even better, they wanted a workforce that was free. Their eyes, filled with the dream of unimaginable wealth, began to look away from Europe and away from the Americas. They looked across the great Atlantic Ocean once more, but this time to a different continent. A third continent. They looked to the great, vast continent of Africa. And in doing so, they were about to make a cold and calculated decision. A decision that would cause the suffering of millions of people. A decision that would stain the sweetness of sugar with the bitterness of unimaginable human cruelty for centuries to come. The bittersweet story of sugar was about to enter its darkest and most bitter chapter of all. The great, insatiable hunger for labor on the sugar islands found an answer. It was not a kind or a good answer. It was not a human answer. It was a cold, cruel, and calculated business decision that would create one of the greatest and most prolonged tragedies in the history of the world. This terrible solution was the transatlantic slave trade. It was a system, an enormous and brutally efficient machine, designed to move millions of people from their homes in Africa to a life of forced labor in the Americas. This system did not move in a straight line. It moved in a great, terrible, and highly profitable triangle that stretched across the wide, dark waters of the Atlantic Ocean. Let us, with a quiet and respectful heart, trace the three sides of this triangle of misery. The first leg of the journey began in the great port cities of Europe. In places like Liverpool in England, Nantes in France, or Lisbon in Portugal. Imagine a tall wooden ship, its sails white against a gray and cloudy European sky. It is preparing for a long voyage. The belly of this ship, the cargo hold, is not empty. It is filled with goods that have been made in the factories of Europe. There are heavy crates of iron bars and muskets and barrels of gunpowder. There are bolts of brightly colored cloth, and chests full of cheap, shiny glass beads and trinkets. And there are barrels and barrels of alcohol, especially rum. This cargo has been chosen very carefully. It has been chosen because it is what the traders on the coast of Africa desire. The ship, loaded with these goods, would then sail south for many weeks, down the coast of Europe and along the vast, curved coast of West Africa. This was the first leg of the triangle. When the ship arrived at a trading fort on the African coast, the second and most horrific part of the business began. The European captain would meet with the local African rulers or powerful slave traders. And here, a terrible transaction would take place. The European captain would trade his cargo of guns and rum and cloth for human beings. Men and women and children. These people had been captured, often in brutal wars between different tribes that were now fueled by the European demand for captives. They were marched for hundreds of miles to the coast, torn forever from their villages, their families, their languages, their entire world. In the cold, hard, inhuman language of the trade, they were no longer considered people. They were now cargo. They were numbers on a ship's ledger. Their humanity was stripped away and a price was put on their head. This was the tragic business that was done on the coast of Africa. And then came the second and most terrible leg of the triangle. The journey known as the Middle Passage. The people who were now captives were rowed in small boats out to the great tall ship. They were taken down below the deck into the belly of the ship, into a place of almost complete and total darkness. Let us try for a moment to imagine this place. The air is hot and thick and heavy and almost impossible to breathe. There is no sunlight. The only sound is the constant groaning creak of the ship's wooden timbers, and the slow, sad rush of the ocean waves outside. The space is so small that there is no room to stand up. There is barely enough room to even lie down. The people were packed together, chained, in a space so small and so crowded it is hard for our modern minds to even comprehend. The journey across the Atlantic Ocean could take many weeks and sometimes many months. It was a journey through a living nightmare. It was a journey of immense fear, of deep and profound sadness and of terrible sickness. These were people who had lost everything. They had lost their homes. They had lost their freedom. They had lost their families. They were surrounded by strangers who did not speak their language. They did not know where they were going or what terrible fate awaited them. It is a sad and almost unbearable truth that millions of people did not survive this journey. They died from disease, from despair, and from the brutal conditions in the holds of these ships. Their bodies were cast into the great, anonymous ocean. It is a tragedy on a scale that is almost too large to hold in our minds. If a person survived the horrors of the Middle Passage, they would finally arrive in the New World. They would arrive in the Sugar Islands. Weak, sick, terrified, and grieving, they would be brought up from the darkness of the ship's hold and into the bright, blinding tropical sun. And here they would be sold. In the public squares of the port towns, they would be made to stand on auction blocks, and the plantation owners, the men who owned the great fields of green gold, would inspect them like animals and bid on them. A family that had managed to survive the journey together would be torn apart here, a mother sold to one plantation, a father to another, a child to a third. This was the final brutal act of stripping away their humanity. Once a plantation owner had bought his new property, the captain of the slave ship could begin the third and final leg of the triangle. He had traded his guns and rum for people. He had sold the people for money. And now he would use that money to buy the treasure of the islands. He would take his ship, the very same ship with its dark and tragic hold, and he would fill it to the brim with the products of the plantations. He would fill it with huge, heavy barrels of raw brown sugar. He would fill it with barrels of sticky, dark molasses. And he would fill it with barrels of strong, sweet rum, which had been made from the sugar cane. And with his ship now full of this valuable sweet cargo, he would set his sails and begin the long journey back home, back to Europe. When he arrived back in a port like Bristol or Liverpool, he would sell the sugar and the rum for an enormous, almost unbelievable profit. And with that profit he would begin the cycle all over again. He would use the money to buy more guns and more cloth and more alcohol. He would load them onto his ship. And he would sail south again to Africa, to begin the terrible, profitable triangle once more. This was the great, terrible, and brutally efficient engine that powered the sugar empire for nearly 300 years. A triangle of misery that connected 3 continents in a cycle of suffering and profit. Guns and goods from Europe were traded for people from Africa, who were forced as slaves to produce sugar in the Americas, which was then sold for huge profits back in Europe. It was a cold and a cruel and a deeply inhuman system. And it worked for a very, very long time. And so, the sweetness that was now beginning to fill the teacups and the coffee cups and the dessert bowls of Europe, the sweetness that brought so much pleasure and delight and comfort, now had a hidden ingredient. An ingredient of immense and immeasurable human suffering. The story of sugar was now truly and forever a bittersweet one. The great and terrible machine of the sugar trade is now in motion. A triangle of misery connects 3 continents. We have followed the journey across the ocean. Now we must bear quiet witness to the lives of the people who were brought to this new world, and who paid the bitter price for its sweetness. Let us now, in our quiet minds, follow one of these captured souls. A young man or a young woman who has somehow survived the terrible journey of the Middle Passage, and who has endured the horror and the humiliation of the auction block. Let us follow them as they are brought to their new and final destination, the sugar plantation. Imagine arriving there for the first time. You are walking in a line with other strangers, your body weak, your heart full of fear and a sadness so deep it has no words. You see the great green fields of sugar cane, stretching in every direction, like a vast, endless, green prison. In the distance, high on a hill, you see the beautiful great house of the owner, a symbol of a world of comfort you will never know. And from somewhere nearby, you hear the constant, deep, groaning sound of the mill, a hungry beast that is always working. This is your new world. The first thing that is taken from you is your name. Your beautiful African name, the name your mother and father gave you, the name that connects you to your ancestors and your home, is gone. It is taken from you. You are given a new, simple European name by your new owner. A name like John or Mary or Thomas. It is a small, cruel act, but it is the first step in a long and terrible process of trying to make you forget who you are. The second thing that is taken is your family. If you were lucky enough to survive the ocean journey with a brother or a sister or a parent, you are very often separated now. You are sent to live in different huts, to work in different gangs on different parts of the plantation. The last human connection to your old life is broken. And the third thing that is taken is your time. Your time is no longer your own. Your life is no longer your own. From this moment on, your waking and your sleeping, your working and your resting, will all be decided for you by the loud, harsh ringing of a plantation bell. Let us walk through a single day in this life. The day begins long before the sun rises. The world is still wrapped in a deep, dark, pre-dawn silence. And then the silence is shattered by the clanging of the bell. It is a harsh, demanding sound. It is the signal to wake up. You rise from a simple straw mattress on the floor of a small, crowded hut, which you share with many other people you do not know. There is no time to rest. You are quickly given a small, simple meal, perhaps a piece of cornbread or some boiled yams. And then you are gathered into a work gang. As the very first faint gray light begins to appear in the eastern sky, you begin the long, silent walk out to the cane fields. Your body is still tired from yesterday's work, but you must walk. And then, as the sun's first rays touch the tops of the tall cane, the work begins. The endless, difficult, back-breaking work of harvesting the sugar. The air in the cane field is hot and wet and still. The tall stalks grow so close together that no breeze can pass through. The long, sharp leaves of the cane feel like 1,000 tiny paper cuts on your arms and your face. Your only tool is a heavy, sharp knife like a machete. And your world, for the next 12 hours, shrinks to a single, repeated, and exhausting rhythm. You reach down and grab a thick stalk of the heavy cane. With one powerful swing of the heavy knife, you cut the stalk at its base. Swish, thud. With another swift cut, you chop off the green leafy top. Swish, thud. You stoop down, your back aching, and you lift the heavy, sticky stalk and place it on a growing pile. And then, you immediately move to the next stalk. And the next. And the next. Swish, thud. Swish, thud. Stoop and lift. This is the rhythm of the harvest. A rhythm that is driven by the watchful eye of the overseer, a man on horseback with a whip. A rhythm that you must maintain hour after hour under the burning tropical sun. The sweat stings your eyes. The thirst is immense. Your muscles scream. But the work does not stop. It is a rhythm that enters your bones. A rhythm that you hear in your ears even when you are trying to sleep. And when the sun finally, mercifully begins to set, painting the sky in beautiful colors of orange and purple that you are too tired to even notice, the day's work is still not over. The mill is a hungry beast. It must be fed. The harvest must continue around the clock. So, some of the work gangs, including yours perhaps, must continue to work into the night. Your world is now lit by the flickering, dancing, orange light of torches. You continue to feed the heavy cane stalks into the crushing, groaning rollers of the mill. Or you work in the boiling house, a place of incredible, suffocating heat, stirring the thick, bubbling syrup in giant, steaming copper cauldrons. Finally, late into the night, the bell rings one last time. The work for today is done. You walk the long, slow, weary path back to your simple hut. Your body is an instrument of pure exhaustion. You are given another small, simple meal. And then you fall onto your straw mattress and into a deep, heavy, and often dreamless sleep. You sleep for just a few short hours. And then, while it is still dark, you will hear it again. The harsh, demanding ringing of the morning bell. And the entire relentless cycle will begin once more. This was the life that sugar created. But in the midst of this terrible, inhuman system, a system designed to crush the human spirit, that spirit refused to be broken completely. In the small, precious, stolen moments of their lives, these enslaved people found ways to be human. They found quiet ways to resist. In the deep quiet of the night, in the privacy of their small, crowded huts, after the long day's work was finally done, they would find ways to remember who they were. An old woman, a grandmother, might gather the small children around her. And in a soft, low whisper, she would tell them the old stories from Africa. The stories of Anansi the clever spider, or of the great animal kings of the forest. She was giving them a gift that the plantation owner could not take away. She was giving them their culture. She was keeping their history alive. A young man might have a small handmade drum, and he would quietly, gently, tap out the rhythms of his homeland. A rhythm of sorrow, but also a rhythm of strength. Or a group of people might gather in the darkness and begin to sing. They would sing low, soft, mournful songs. Songs of their lost homes, of their suffering, and of a deep, unshakable faith. These were the very first seeds of the blues and the spirituals, a new and powerful kind of music born from a deep and profound pain. And sometimes, a person would have a tiny patch of ground, no bigger than a blanket, behind their hut. And here, in this little piece of earth, they would plant a few seeds. A sweet potato, a few beans, a pepper plant. It was a small garden. But it was their garden. It was the one place in this whole vast plantation where they could grow something for themselves. It was a small act of creation in a life of endless, repetitive labor. A small act of hope. This was the other side of the story. A life of relentless, back-breaking work, designed to strip away all humanity. But it was also a life where, in the quiet, stolen moments, in the deep, dark spaces between the end of one day's work and the beginning of the next, the human spirit still found a way to tell a story, to sing a song, and to dream of a freedom they might never know. The sugar they produced brought a fleeting moment of sweetness to a cup of tea in a fine parlor in Europe. But the true cost of that small, sweet moment was a lifetime of bitter human toil. The story of the harvested sugarcane did not end in the field. Once it was cut, its precious juice began to die. A race against time began. The stalks were quickly loaded onto carts and brought to the most intense, the most dangerous, and in many ways the most hellish place on the entire plantation. It was a long, low building made of stone, with a tall chimney that was always breathing a column of sweet-smelling white smoke into the sky. It was called the boiling house. Let us, in our quiet minds, step inside. The moment you pass through the wide, open doorway, you are hit by a physical wall of heat. It is a thick, wet, suffocating heat that catches in your throat and makes it hard to breathe. The air is hotter than the hottest tropical day. It is the deep, penetrating heat of open fires and the heavy, wet heat of boiling steam. And the smell is overwhelming. It is a sweet, almost sickeningly sweet smell of boiling cane juice. It is a smell so thick you can almost taste it in the air. And mixed with this sweetness is the sharp, smoky smell of the wood fires, and the salty human smell of constant, heavy sweat. It is not a quiet place. It is filled with a constant, deep, and rumbling symphony of difficult work. There is the low, hungry roar of the fires, being constantly fed by other enslaved workers. And there is the deep, thick, rhythmic bubbling sound of the syrup in the giant cauldrons, a slow, heavy blurp, 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 that never stops. The air is filled with thick clouds of white steam, which swirl and drift in the rafters, making it hard to see from one end of the long room to the other. And moving through this hazy, fiery world are the figures of the workers, their bodies shining with sweat in the orange glow of the furnace mouths. They move with a slow, practiced, and weary grace. This was the factory at the heart of the plantation. And the work done here was a form of difficult and dangerous alchemy. The process began when the raw, greenish-gray cane juice, freshly crushed from the mill, was piped into the first and largest of a series of giant, round copper cauldrons. These cauldrons were set into a long brick structure, with a fire pit running underneath. This line of cauldrons, each one a little smaller and a little hotter than the one before it, was called the sugar train. In the first great cauldron, the fire underneath was kept at a gentle heat. Here the raw juice was slowly warmed. A skilled worker would add a small amount of a clarifying agent, like a bit of lime. This would cause all the tiny impurities in the juice, the little bits of dirt and mud and green cane fiber, to clump together and rise to the surface as a thick, dark, dirty foam. 4 hours, a worker would have to stand over this hot cauldron, using a long-handled skimmer like a giant spoon with holes in it, to patiently and carefully skim this foam off the top, leaving a cleaner, clearer juice behind. Then the next stage began. The cleaner juice was ladled into the second cauldron in the line. This was incredibly heavy and dangerous work. The workers used giant, long-handled ladles made of copper. It took great strength to lift the heavy, hot liquid and transfer it without spilling a single, scalding drop. In this second pot, the fire was hotter. The juice would begin to boil more vigorously. Great, thick clouds of sweet steam would rise up, filling the room. And in the third and fourth cauldrons, the heat was even more intense. The bubbling became a furious, rolling boil. The job here was simple, but it took many, many hours. It was to boil away the water. To slowly, patiently concentrate the sweetness. The workers had to watch the pots constantly. They would listen to the sound of the bubbling liquid, which would change as it grew thicker. They would watch the color as it slowly transformed from a pale, watery green to a rich, beautiful gold, and then to a deep, dark amber. Finally, the now very thick, very hot syrup was moved to the last and smallest cauldron in the line. This one was called the tiche, and it sat directly over the fiercest, hottest part of the fire. The work at the tiche was the most skilled and the most dangerous job in the entire boiling house. It was not done by just anyone. It was done by the master sugar boiler. This was often an older, highly experienced enslaved man, someone who had spent a lifetime learning the subtle and secret language of sugar. The success of the entire operation, the quality of the final product, rested on his skill and his judgment. He would stand for hours in this place of almost unbearable heat, his eyes fixed on the thick, furiously bubbling syrup. He could not use a clock. He could not use a thermometer. He had to use his senses, his experience, his art. From time to time, he would dip a small wooden paddle into the boiling syrup. He would lift it out, and as the thick liquid dripped off, he would watch it. But most importantly, he would take a small amount of the hot syrup, cool it for a moment, and then pull it between his thumb and his forefinger. He was watching for a threat. He was waiting for the exact, perfect, magical moment when the syrup would form a single, delicate and perfect thread of a certain length and thickness. It was a science and an art that he held in his own two hands. If he waited just a few seconds too long, the sugar would get too hot. It would burn. It would be ruined. The whole batch would be lost. If he acted a few seconds too soon, the sugar would not be concentrated enough, and it would not form crystals. The entire year's profit for the plantation owner rested on his judgment, in this one single fleeting moment. When he saw the perfect thread form between his fingers, he would give a great shout. A single word that would ring out above the roar of the fires: strike. And in that instant, a flurry of organized, expert action would begin. A team of the strongest workers would rush forward with giant ladles. And in a coordinated, dangerous dance, they would quickly scoop the incredibly hot, thick and heavy syrup out of the tiche, and pour it into large, shallow wooden troughs that were waiting on the floor. Now, in these cooling troughs, the final, quiet transformation would take place. The thick liquid away from the fire began to cool. And as it cooled, the tiny, invisible sugar crystals that had been born in the intense heat of the tiche now began to grow. The whole mass slowly, over several hours, turned from a liquid into a thick, wet, gritty, brownish substance like damp, heavy sand. This was the raw, unrefined sugar called muscovado. But the process was still not complete. This raw sugar was then shoveled into large wooden barrels called hogsheads. These barrels had been made with small holes in the bottom. They were then rolled to another building, a dark, quiet, and sweet-smelling place called the curing house. Here the barrels would sit sometimes for many weeks. And slowly, very slowly, drop by precious drop, the dark, bitter liquid molasses that was still mixed in with the sugar crystals would drain out through the holes in the bottom of the barrels, leaving the lighter, drier, and sweeter crystals behind. This was the final, slow separation of the dark and bitter part of the sugar cane from the light and sweet part. The work in the boiling house was a science and it was an art. The enslaved sugar boilers were master craftsmen, alchemists of sweetness. Their skill was immense, and their role was absolutely vital to the plantation's success. But it was a place of terrible, constant danger. A slip, a splash of the boiling syrup, a moment of lost focus from exhaustion, could result in a terrible, life-altering burn. And the work was endless, often continuing 24 hours a day during the harvest, in a place of suffocating heat and choking steam. It was another of the great and bitter paradoxes of the Sugar Islands. The place where the sweetest, most delightful, most joyful substance in the world was perfected, was also one of the most difficult, most dangerous, and most hellish places to be. The pure, sweet crystals, now finally ready to be sealed in their barrels and shipped to the fine parlors of Europe, carried no memory of the fire, and the steam, and the sweat, and the incredible human skill and endurance from which they were born. The work in the dark, sweet-smelling curing house is finally done. The last precious drops of the dark, bitter molasses have drained away. What is left behind in the great wooden barrels is the prize. The raw, brownish, or pale yellow sugar crystals. The treasure that this entire, vast, and brutal system was created to produce. The barrels, called hogsheads, are sealed shut. They are incredibly heavy. The plantation owner's special mark is burned into the side of the wood with a hot iron. The barrels are then rolled, with great effort, down the dusty roads to the port town, where a tall ship is waiting. With ropes and pulleys, the heavy barrels are loaded deep into the hold of the ship. They are placed in the very same dark, empty space where, on the journey before, the ship had carried its tragic and precious cargo of human beings. The great, terrible cycle of the triangle is now completing itself. The ship raises its anchor, it catches the wind in its great, white sails, and it begins its long, slow journey back across the Atlantic Ocean, back to Europe. The ship and its sweet cargo carry no memory of the heat and the sweat and the suffering from which they were born. The ocean washes away the story. Now, Let us travel in an instant, far faster than any ship. Let us leave the hot, humid, and difficult world of the sugar islands behind. Let us cross the entire ocean in a single, quiet breath. And let us arrive in a fine, elegant drawing room in a great house in a city like London or Paris. It is a cool and peaceful afternoon. A gentle gray rain is falling outside, making soft, pattering sounds against the tall glass windows. Inside, a warm and cheerful fire crackles peacefully in a beautiful marble fireplace. The chairs and sofas are soft, covered in beautiful, patterned silk and velvet. The air in the room is quiet, filled only with the gentle, steady ticking of a tall grandfather clock in the corner, and the soft, polite murmur of quiet conversation. A group of wealthy ladies, dressed in fine, elaborate gowns of lace and silk, are gathered for their afternoon tea. They speak of poetry or of a new piece of music or of the latest society gossip. Their world is one of great comfort and beauty and elegance. A servant in a clean, crisp, and perfect uniform enters the room silently. He carries a polished silver tray. On the tray is a beautiful teapot, made of the finest, most delicate porcelain, so thin you can almost see through it. It is painted with tiny, perfect, colorful flowers. Next to it are the matching delicate teacups. And next to them is a beautiful shining silver bowl. And inside this bowl is the treasure, the sugar. It is not the rough, brownish sugar from the plantation. This sugar has been sent to a European refinery, and it has been purified again, until it is as pure and as white and as sparkling as a field of fresh, untouched snow. One of the ladies takes a tiny, elegant silver spoon. She dips it gently into the sugar bowl. The spoon comes out with a small, perfect, glittering mound of the white crystals. She holds it for a moment, suspended in the quiet air, a spoonful of pure, white, innocent-looking sweetness. But let us pause here. Let us use the quiet wisdom we have gained on our long journey tonight. Let us see what is truly held in that tiny silver spoon. In every single one of those tiny, glittering white crystals is the memory of the hot, tropical sun. In every single crystal is the memory of a human back bent in half under that sun, in a field of sharp green leaves. In every single crystal is the memory of the heavy, sharp weight of a machete, and the endless, exhausting rhythmic sound of the harvest, swish, thud. In every single crystal is the memory of the roaring fire and the choking, sweet steam and the dangerous, bubbling heat of the boiling house. And in every single crystal is the memory of a human life. A life that was stolen from a home far, far away. A life of stolen freedom, of lost family, and of unending work. In time, good and brave people in Europe and America would begin to learn of the terrible truth behind their sweet tea. People who fought to end the great injustice of slavery, they were called the abolitionists. And they had a powerful and a terrible name for the sugar that was produced by the work of enslaved people. They called it blood sugar. They would hold up a bowl of this beautiful white sugar in their public meetings, and they would ask people to truly think about where it came from. They would say that every sweet spoonful was tainted with an invisible but very real ingredient. They would say that it was mixed with the blood and the sweat and the tears of the millions of men and women and children who were forced to live and die to produce it. And now, back in the quiet, elegant drawing room, the lady gently tips her silver spoon. The white crystals fall, like a soft, silent snow, into the dark, warm tea in her delicate porcelain cup. She stirs it once, twice, and the crystals, with all of their long and bitter and secret history, simply disappear. They dissolve. They vanish without a trace. The entire immense journey, the lost ocean, the rising mountain, the captured person from Africa, the back-breaking labor in the field, the fiery, dangerous boiling house, the long, terrible sea voyage, all of it, all of that history and all of that pain, has been reduced to a single pleasant and fleeting sweet taste in a cup of afternoon tea. And the lady and her friends, as they sip their sweet tea and speak of pleasant, beautiful things, they know nothing of this. They do not hear the clang of the plantation bell in the pre-dawn darkness. They do not feel the suffocating heat of the boiling house. They do not see the faces of the people whose entire lives were spent in relentless toil to create this small, simple moment of pleasure for them. This was the great and the terrible magic of the sugar empire. It was a system that was designed to perfectly and completely separate the product from the process. It allowed the people of Europe to enjoy the wonderful, delightful, sweet result, without ever having to see, or to think about, the terrible and bitter human cost of its creation. The great Atlantic Ocean was not just a physical distance that separated the continents. It was a moral distance. It was a veil of water and ignorance that allowed one part of the world to live in elegant, sweet comfort, built upon the unseen and unspoken suffering of another part of the world. This was the true, deep, and bitter meaning of the bittersweet story of sugar. The sweet was in the teacup, was in the candy. It was in the beautiful sugar castles of the kings. And the bitter was in the lives and the labor and the stolen freedom of the millions of people who were bought and sold and worked to death in the great green and terrible paradise of the sugar fields. In this age of sugar, the two were forever connected. They were two sides of the same tragic and valuable coin. You could not have one without the other. The sugar plantation was a machine. A great and terrible machine, designed to crush not just the sugar cane but the human spirit as well. It was a system designed to strip away a person's name, their family, their freedom, and their hope. It would be easy to think that this machine succeeded completely. But it never did. The story of the sugar plantations is a story of immense suffering. But it is not a story of passive victimhood. It is also a story of incredible, unbreakable courage. A story of constant and creative and powerful resistance. This resistance was not always a loud and violent battle. More often, it was a quiet and invisible war fought every single day, in 1,000 small and subtle ways. The plantation machine was built for speed and for profit. And so, the most common and most effective form of resistance was to simply slow that machine down. To introduce a quiet human friction into its brutal, inhuman efficiency. It might be a worker in the hot fields, pretending not to understand an order from the overseer, forcing it to be repeated, stealing a few precious seconds of rest. It might be the deliberate, slow, and weary pace of work that would begin as soon as the overseer on his horse had turned his back. It might be a hoe or a heavy machete that was accidentally broken on a rock, causing a delay while it was taken to be mended. A small accident that was, in fact, a small victory. It might be the careless misplacing of a tool or the wrong path taken by the driver of an ox cart, creating a small moment of chaos and confusion in a system that demanded perfect, mindless order. These small acts on their own seemed like nothing. But together, performed by thousands of people, every single day, they were a constant tax on the plantation's profits. They were a quiet, collective, and powerful way of saying, we will not be turned into mindless machines. We are still human. Another form of quiet resistance was what the plantation owners called theft. The enslaved people would often take sugar cane from the fields to chew for a burst of energy, or they would find ways to take a little extra of the raw, brown sugar from the boiling house. But in their own hearts, it was not stealing. How can you steal something that you have created with your own sweat, and your own labor, and your own pain? It was simply taking back a tiny, tiny fraction of the immense wealth that had been so brutally stolen from them. It was an act of quiet justice. But perhaps the greatest and most profound resistance of all was a cultural one. It was a quiet and a powerful and a deeply held refusal to forget who they were. The system was designed to erase their past, to strip them of their African identity. But they would not allow it. In the deep quiet of the night, in the privacy of their small, crowded huts, after the long day's work was finally done, they would gather together and they would perform the most powerful act of rebellion of all. They would remember. An elder, a grandmother with the memory of her homeland still bright in her mind, would gather the children around her in the darkness. And in a soft, low whisper, so the overseer could not hear, she would tell them the old stories. The stories of their people. The clever fables of Anansi the spider. The great epics of the animal kings of the jungle. She was giving them a gift that no owner could take away. She was giving them their culture, their history, their soul. To tell a story was an act of rebellion. Someone else might have a small handmade drum. And they would quietly, gently, tap out the complex, beautiful rhythms of their homeland. a rhythm that spoke of a life of freedom, a rhythm that connected them to their ancestors. And sometimes, a voice would begin to sing, a low, soft, mournful song, a song of the sorrow of their present life, but also a song of the strength of their spirit. This music, born in the deep sadness of the sugar fields, was the very first seed of the blues and the spirituals, and the gospel music that would one day change the world. To sing a song was an act of rebellion. These quiet acts of cultural resistance were a way of saying, "You may own my body, you may own my time, but you will never ever own my spirit." And sometimes the quiet resistance became a bold and daring escape. Some of the bravest and most desperate chose to run. They would wait for a dark, stormy, moonless night. And they would slip away from the plantation, like a shadow in the darkness. They would run for days, deep into the wild, untamed parts of the islands, into the dense, impenetrable rainforests, and up into the high, steep, misty mountains where the plantation owners and their overseers were afraid to go. And here, in these hidden, secret places, they would build new lives for themselves. They would build their own secret, free villages. They were known as Maroons. They built simple houses. They planted their own gardens with the seeds they had managed to carry with them. They hunted for their own food. They created their own small communities with their own leaders. They recreated, in these secret mountain fortresses, a small, precious piece of the Africa that they had lost. These Maroon communities in places like Jamaica and Suriname were a constant source of fear for the plantation owners. And they were a powerful, shining symbol of hope for all of the enslaved people left behind in the fields. The knowledge that there was a place, a free place, somewhere out there in the high green hills, was a light in the darkness. It was a constant, living reminder that freedom was not just a dream. It was possible. And sometimes all of the quiet, simmering daily resistance and all of the hope inspired by the Maroons would boil over into a great and a fiery and a violent uprising. There were hundreds and hundreds of slave rebellions throughout the long, dark history of the Sugar Islands. Most of them were tragically and brutally crushed by the plantation owners' militias. But one succeeded. And it shook the entire world to its very foundations. On the French island of Saint-Domingue, the richest, most profitable, and most brutally efficient sugar colony in the entire world, the enslaved people rose up in a great and coordinated revolution in the year 1791. They were led by brilliant and courageous men, like the great Toussaint Louverture. They fought a long and a difficult and a bloody war for their freedom. They fought against the local planters. And they fought against the great and powerful armies of Napoleon Bonaparte, the strongest armies in the world at that time. And against all odds, they won. They drove the French out of their land. They abolished slavery forever. And they created their own new independent nation. They cast off the French name of Saint-Domingue, and they gave their land its original native name. They called it Haiti. It was the first free black republic in the world. A nation founded by enslaved people who had, through their own courage and their own sacrifice, freed themselves. The Haitian Revolution sent a shockwave of both hope and terror across the entire world. It was a brilliant, shining message of hope to all enslaved people, that freedom was not just a distant dream, but something that could be fought for and won. And it was a terrifying message to every plantation owner in the Americas, that the brutal system they had built, the system they believed was invincible, could be broken. So, while the story of the sugar plantations is a story of immense and terrible suffering, it is not a story of passive victimhood. It is a story of the incredible, unbreakable strength of the human spirit. From the slow, quiet, daily acts of defiance that slowed the great machine, to the brave escapes into the high mountains, to the great and fiery revolutions that won their freedom, the people who were caught in this terrible system never, ever stopped fighting. They fought for their dignity. They fought for their culture. And they fought for their freedom. The great movement to abolish slavery was growing in Europe. But the most powerful force for change came from the enslaved people themselves. Their constant, unwavering resistance, in all its many forms, was slowly but surely beginning to shake the very foundations of the great and terrible sugar empire. We ended our last chapter with a quiet and a very serious question. What happens to our bodies and to our world when sweetness is no longer a rare and special treat, but the very air that we breathe? For a long time, for most of the 20th century, no one really knew the answer. The great flood of sweetness was so new, so exciting, and seemed to bring so much simple pleasure, that very few people thought to question it. But slowly, over the past 50 years or so, doctors and scientists, and quiet observers of the human condition began to notice a change. They saw that people all over the world were beginning to suffer from a new set of illnesses. New and difficult health problems that had been very, very rare in the time of our grandparents and our great-grandparents. And as they searched for the cause of these new problems, their attention again and again was drawn back to the great sweet flood. They began to uncover the bitter side of this new and seemingly wonderful sweet world. To understand this, we must take one last journey. A journey back into our own bodies, to understand their ancient and beautiful design. Our bodies are like incredible, ancient machines, designed with a deep wisdom that has been perfected over hundreds of thousands of years. They were designed for a world that no longer exists. For almost all of human history, our ancient ancestors lived in a world where sweetness was incredibly, wonderfully rare. Sweetness was the taste of a lucky and a joyful find. It was the taste of a handful of ripe, wild berries, found in the forest in the middle of a warm summer. It was the taste of a piece of wild fruit, a precious treasure that was only available for a few short weeks a year. And it was the taste of a honeycomb found high in a hollow tree, a prize that was guarded by thousands of angry bees. To find something sweet was a special and a beautiful and a very rare event. And so, our bodies, in their great wisdom, were designed to love this taste above all others. When our ancient ancestors ate something sweet, a powerful and a happy message was sent to their brain. The brain would say, "This is wonderful. This is pure, quick, and precious energy. Eat as much of it as you can find right now, because you may not find this wonderful gift again for a very, very long time." This was a brilliant and a perfect survival mechanism. In a world of scarcity, this love of sweetness helped to keep us alive. But here is the great and the quiet and the tragic mismatch of our modern lives. Our bodies are still running on that ancient, beautiful programming. Our brains still believe that sweetness is rare and precious, and something to be sought out at all costs. But our world has completely and totally changed. Sweetness is no longer rare. It is no longer a special treat. With the coming of the candy bars, the soda pops, and especially the hidden sugars in all our food, sweetness is now everywhere. The special, once-in-a-while, treat has become an all-the-time food. And our ancient bodies, in their quiet wisdom, do not know what to do. Let us imagine our body is like a small, peaceful village, and a gentle river flows through it. The river brings clean water for the village to use. This is like our body using a little bit of sugar, a little bit of glucose for its daily energy. It is a healthy and a happy balance. But now, imagine a great and a sudden flood. A huge tidal wave of water comes rushing down from the mountains. The gentle river overflows its banks. The water is everywhere. It floods the houses and the fields and the streets. The small village cannot handle so much water all at once. What was once a life-giving river has now become a destructive disaster. This is what can happen inside our bodies when we are constantly, day after day, flooded with too much sugar. The system becomes overwhelmed. Inside our bodies, we have a very important and a very busy messenger. This messenger's name is insulin. When we eat some sugar, insulin's job is to travel through the river of our blood, to all the tiny cells in our body. It gently knocks on the door of each cell and says, "Please open up. I have some sugar here for you to use as energy." And the cell happily opens its door and takes the sugar in. But what happens when the sugar is always there? What happens when the messenger, insulin, is knocking on the cell's door all day and all night? The cell, like a person who is tired of a constant visitor, begins to get annoyed. It begins to ignore the knocking. It stops opening its door so readily. And so, the messenger, insulin, has to knock louder, and louder, and louder. The body has to send out more and more insulin, shouting at the cells to please open up. And eventually, many of the cells just stop listening altogether. This is a quiet problem, a problem that happens silently inside of us. And now, the sugar, with fewer and fewer doors open to it, is left floating in the river of our blood. And so, our body, in its great and ancient wisdom, knows it must do something with all of this extra and used sugar. It cannot let it stay in the blood where it can cause damage. So it does the only thing it knows how to do to save a precious resource. It stores it. It carefully takes the extra sugar and it transforms it and it packs it away in special storage cells to be saved for a future time of hunger, a time of famine that, in our modern world, never, ever comes. It stores this extra sweet energy as body fat. And so, we arrive at the final and most modern bitter irony of our story. The very same substance, sugar, that was once a symbol of life, and of quick energy, and of survival, has, in its new and great abundance, become a source of sickness for many people around the world. The phrase we used in our thumbnail, the sweetest poison, is not because sugar is an evil or a toxic thing. It is not. It is a beautiful, natural substance. It has become a poison for some, simply because there is now too much of it. It is like a beautiful climbing rose bush. In a small garden with care, it is a thing of great beauty. But if left to grow wild without balance, it can become a great thorny jungle, choking out all the other plants and taking over the entire garden. And this new and this very difficult problem is not happening in just one country. As the Western diet, with its candy bars and its soda pops and its hundreds of hidden sugars, has spread all across the globe, this bittersweet challenge has followed it everywhere. It is a quiet and a slow and a global health crisis. A crisis born from one of the greatest success stories in the entire history of food. This, then, is the final and the most difficult bitter chapter in the long story of sugar. A chapter that we are all living in together today. The journey that began with a simple, innocent and joyful taste of a single green blade of grass, has led us, after thousands of years, to this very complicated and challenging place. But our story does not have to end here, in this place of difficulty. The great book of history is not closed. Just as the good people of the past learned about the deep bitterness of slavery and decided together to make a great change, we, in our own time, are just now beginning to learn and to understand the new bitterness of too much sweetness. And with this new knowledge comes a new and a quiet wisdom. A new opportunity for us to find a new, and a more gentle, and a more healthy balance in our own lives and in our world. Of course, we have come so far. We have explored the difficult and complex challenges of our modern, sweetened world. Now, before we prepare for our final rest, it is time to look back one last time. It is time to gather all the threads of our long and winding and epic story, and see the beautiful and sad and complex tapestry that they have woven together. And so, our long and winding and bittersweet story of sugar is now almost complete. We have followed its incredible journey from a single humble blade of grass, to a great and powerful force that has shaped the history of our world. Before we arrive at our final, quiet, resting place, let us take just a few peaceful moments to look back. Let us see how all the different threads of this story, the threads of light and the threads of shadow, the sweet and the bitter, are woven together into one great and magnificent and deeply human tapestry. Let us remember now where we began our journey together. Do you remember? We began in a warm and a green and a very ancient rainforest. A world of deep peace and quiet, filled with the gentle sounds of birdsong and falling rain. And there we saw the tall, noble sugarcane plant, drinking the golden sunlight and silently, magically, turning it into a secret, sweet treasure hidden in its heart. We then imagined the moment of first discovery. The simple, innocent and wonderful moment when one of our ancient ancestors, perhaps a curious child, first tasted that pure, wild sweetness. A moment of pure, uncomplicated joy. A simple, happy gift from the forest. From there, our journey took us to the wise and ancient land of India. We stood in the warm, sweet-smelling air, and we watched as clever and patient minds solved a great and wonderful puzzle. We heard the slow, rhythmic groaning of the ox-driven mill, and we saw the sweet, green juice pour out. We watched the masters of the fire as they boiled and purified this juice. And we witnessed the quiet, slow-motion miracle of the world's first sugar crystals being born from the cooling syrup. Khanda. The taste of candy. The sweetness finally had been set free. We then followed these first precious crystals as they traveled west, as a stranger in a strange land. We saw them arrive in the great empires of Greece and Rome, where they were not seen as a food, but as a rare and a mysterious and an incredibly expensive Indian salt, a powerful doctor's secret, living in the deep shadow of the gentle golden queen of sweetness, honey. Our story then led us to the magnificent, glittering courts of the great caliphs, in the Islamic Golden Age. Here we saw sugar welcomed as an honored guest. We saw it transformed into a breathtaking art form, into delicate, flaky pastries and jewel-like jams, and incredible edible sculptures of pure, white sugar. It was a great and joyful celebration of flavor and of art and of beauty. Then we felt the great and powerful craving that was born when the weary knights of the European Crusades tasted this new Eastern magic for the first time. And we sailed on the tall, proud ships of the Venetian merchants, the masters of the sea, who built a beautiful, floating empire on their clever and ruthless control of this new white gold. Our journey then became one of great adventure as we sailed west, across the vast, dark, unknown Atlantic Ocean with a brave and stubborn sailor named Christopher Columbus. And with him, we stood on the shores of a new paradise. A world of warm sun and rich earth, where the sugar cane had finally found its perfect home. A place where it could grow into a vast, green and endless ocean of potential wealth. And then, the beautiful tapestry of our story began to show its darker threads. The bitter threads that are woven so tightly with the sweet. We had to bear quiet and respectful witness to the great and terrible thirst for labor that this new paradise created. We traced the sad and the cold and the tragic lines of the triangle trade, the great and terrible machine that connected 3 continents in a cycle of profit and of pain. We stood in our minds in the endless, hot and suffocating cane fields. We heard the relentless, rhythmic sound of the heavy machete. And we stood in the fiery, dangerous and exhausting heat of the boiling house. And we began to understand the immense and the almost unimaginable human cost of that simple, easy sweetness. But even in that deep darkness, we saw the brilliant, unbreakable light of the human spirit. We saw the quiet, daily acts of resistance. We saw the brave escapes to the high mountains to build free communities. And we saw the great and the fiery and the successful revolutions that shook the world. And we heard the slow and the steady and the powerful stirring of conscience, an ocean away in Europe as good and brave people fought for decades to end the great injustice. A quiet revolution fought with teacups and with words, and with an unshakable belief in human dignity. And finally, our story brought us into our own modern world. We saw the rise of a new and an unexpected sweet hero, the humble sugar beet. And we felt the power of the great steam engines and the magic of the clever new machines of the Industrial Revolution. We witnessed the great flood of cheap and easy and abundant sugar that washed over the entire world. A flood that gave birth to the simple, everyday pleasures of the candy bar and the soda pop. And at last, we discovered the quiet and the secret and the complicated challenge of the hidden sugar and the new bittersweet health problems of our own modern time. This, then, is the great woven tapestry of sugar. A thread of brilliant, golden sweetness is woven right next to a thread of deep, dark, bitter sorrow. A thread of incredible human ingenuity and discovery is woven next to a thread of incredible human cruelty and greed. A thread of joyful, childlike celebration is woven next to a thread of silent, endless, adult toil. And a thread of life-giving, wonderful energy is woven next to the difficult thread of modern sickness. You cannot pull one thread out without unraveling all the others. They are forever and deeply woven together. This is the great paradox of our story. This is the truth that lies at the very heart of what it means to be bittersweet. We have seen its incredible journey. We have understood its complex story. We have held both the sweetness and the bitterness in our quiet and our peaceful awareness. And now, having seen it all, our work is done. The great story is complete. There is nothing left to learn and there is nothing left to do. All that is left is to rest. To let the gentle echoes of this long and epic journey, this great and bittersweet story, gently rock you into a deep and a peaceful and a very well-deserved sleep. Our final chapter, our journey home to rest, is about to begin. And so, our story is told. The great winding river of our journey has finally reached the calm, and the quiet, and the open sea of sleep. There are no more stories to tell tonight. There are no more places to visit. There is only this moment, this quiet, this peace. Let the memory of all the sweetness we have talked about on our long journey be a gentle, warm comfort to you now. And let the memory of all the bitterness, all the difficulty and the sadness, simply dissolve and melt away like a sugar crystal in warm water, leaving only a feeling of deep and profound peace. May your own life, in its own beautiful way, always find its perfect and its gentle balance of sweetness. And may your rest tonight be the sweetest of all. And now, it is time. It is time to let go of the story completely. It is time to allow your body and your mind to drift and to float on the gentle, quiet, welcoming waves of sleep. Imagine, if you can, a feeling of soft, warm, liquid gold, like the most wonderful, pure and gentle honey, beginning to pool at the very tips of your toes. Feel this warm, heavy, liquid gold as it slowly, so slowly begins to fill your feet. Your feet become so very warm, so very heavy, so deeply and completely relaxed. All the journeys of the day are done. Feel this gentle, heavy warmth as it flows into your ankles, and up into your lower legs. Your calves become soft, and loose, and so very heavy. Allow this wonderful, warm and heavy feeling to move into your knees, and to fill your upper legs. These strong muscles can now let go of all their effort. They are sinking down, 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 into the wonderful softness beneath you. Feel your hips and your back become heavy and warm, releasing all tension, feeling completely and totally held and supported by the surface beneath you. You do not need to hold yourself up any longer. You can let go. The gentle golden warmth now fills your stomach and your chest. You feel a deep sense of inner calm spreading from your center. Your breathing is slow, and it is easy. Your heart is beating at a slow and a steady and a peaceful rhythm. Now feel the warmth flow down from your shoulders, a place where we so often hold the weight of the world. Just let that weight dissolve now. Let it all melt away into the warmth. Let your shoulders become soft and heavy and peaceful. Feel the relaxation flow all the way down your arms, like warm honey, through your elbows, your wrists, and into your hands. Let your hands be soft and open and still. Your fingers are resting gently. The work of the day is done. Allow the warmth to soothe your neck and your jaw. Let your jaw be soft and slightly open. Let your tongue rest peacefully in your mouth. And finally, feel the gentle, peaceful warmth in your face. Feel it soften the tiny muscles around your mouth and your cheeks. Feel the muscles around your eyes become so very soft, so very relaxed. Your eyelids feel heavy and warm and peaceful. Feel the space between your eyebrows become smooth and wide. Your entire forehead is calm and clear. Your whole body, from the tips of your toes to the very top of your head, is now held in this wonderful, warm, heavy, and deeply peaceful feeling of relaxation. And now, there is only your breath. Nothing else matters. Just the gentle, the silent, the easy feeling of your own breathing. It requires no effort at all. It is the most natural thing in the world. Your body knows how to do it perfectly. Just rest and feel the gentle tide coming in and going out. Each breath that you take in is a slow, silent wave of peace, washing up onto the quiet shore of your being. And each breath that you let out is the wave slowly, softly pulling back, carrying away any last little lingering thoughts, leaving the shore of your mind clean and quiet and perfectly still. Breathing in, peace. Breathing out, letting go. And out. So simple. So easy. So calm. The story is over. The day is done. You are safe. You are warm. You are comfortable. You are held. There is nothing left to do. There is nothing left to think about. There is only sleep now. Drifting. Floating. Letting go now. Sleep now. Rest deeply. Good night.